Chapter 503. In the office on the top floor of the unnatural firm building. Yu Tong, dressed in a black suit and skirt, walked down the corridor in her high heels with a stack of documents in her hands. Yu Tong frowned slightly when she reached the office door. She pushed the door open from half a meter away, and the door was opened by an irresistible force. The floor-to-ceiling windows in the office were wide open. The curtains fluttered in the wind and golden sunlight filled the room. Kale was sitting on Yu Tong's personal office chair with his legs crossed. He was resting with his eyes closed. When Yu Tong opened the door, he couldn't help but beckon her with his finger. "Boss, why didn't you tell me you were coming back?" Yu Tong shook her head helplessly. There was an unconcealable smile on her fair and beautiful face. She walked into the room with cat-like steps and closed the office door with a wave of her hand. Yu Tong came to the office chair and put down the documents in her hands. She smoothed out the creases on the back of her skirt from top to bottom. She used Kale as a human chair and sat on his lap. Her slender legs were pressed together and placed elegantly at an angle. Yu Tong's body was very light. There was an indescribable softness to it, and there was a faint fragrance. Kale coughed and said, "Ahem, it wouldn't be good if others came in and saw this." "Don't worry. I've already reported this to my mother." Yu Tong smiled gently. "That won't do. It wouldn't be good if other family Cal members came in to report on work and saw this." Although Kale said that, his hand still followed his instincts and gently supported Yu Tong's amazingly elastic waist. "Okay, I got it." As Yu Tong spoke, she covered the entire building with her consciousness under Kale's puzzled gaze. "Everyone listen up. I'm taking a break today, so no one is allowed to take half a step into the office on the top floor. Otherwise you'll have to bear the consequences." Yu Tong's commanding voice was transmitted to every family Cal member's mind, causing the family Cal members who were at work to tremble violently. They instinctively replied, "Yes, ma'am." Many people who came to consult were confused. "You're really something." Kale smiled bitterly. "This should be enough, right? No matter what you want to do, it doesn't matter. No one will disturb you." Yu Tong stretched her back a little, her body showing a breathtaking curve, which made Kale feel a little hot. Yu Tong's words came into his ears again. "You won't do anything anyway, boss. Don't be so absolute." Kale snorted softly. He used Yu Tong as a pillow and hugged her in his arms. However, he lowered his head and thought about something. Yu Tong keenly sensed this and said gently, "Boss, ever since you went to God's domain last time, you've been absent-minded. You seem to be thinking about something. It's troublesome." Kale fiddled with the pendant on Yu Tong's neck that had a mind gem embedded in it. He could not help but sigh and say, "The ether particles and the reality gem that were originally in my hands were actually obtained by Loki. Moreover, Lorna is still in the hands of the enemy. We don't know the exact situation yet. In addition, there might be a war in the future that even I can't handle. Even if I want to relax, I can't relax anymore." Yu Tong held his hand and said sincerely, "Boss, I'll share your burden. No matter what the future is, as long as you're here, I'm not afraid." "I know. Of course I know." Kale sniffed Yu Tong's black hair and said, "We still have to plan for a rainy day. The current battle strength of Earth's lineup is far from enough. We need to dig up as many talents as possible and cultivate heroes who can take charge of things on their own. That's why you went to get in touch with the strange doctor, Empress Little Peter, and Hank Pym." Yu Tong smiled and said. Even though she had not been by Kale's side all the time, she viewed Kale's matters as more important than her own life. Therefore, she basically knew about them at the first possible moment. Kale was also happy to share his worries with Yu Tong. Not only was Yu Tong his lover and trusted him 100%, but Yu Tong also had enough ability to shoulder the burden of the problems he was currently facing. Of course, Lucy, who had awakened her ice attribute physique, also had the qualifications. Yu Tong pondered and said, "You've personally come into contact with the others, but you didn't do it with Hank Pym. Instead, you handed it to someone else. Is this reliable?" Kale smiled calmly and said, "There's nothing reliable or not. I'm just giving them a push or giving them a sense of pressure so that they can speed up and start on the trajectory of their lives that they should be traveling on. As for whether they can reach the end, that's not something I care about. A hero who could not rely on his own strength to become a hero could not be considered a hero. At best, he was just an outstanding warrior." Yu Tong rolled her eyes at him and said, "Even so, you still sent out the poison agent. That's just in case to correct some mistakes." Kale shrugged and the corner of his mouth curled up. "Don't some people like to play within a game? Then let's compete and see who has more power behind the scenes. Let's see who has more powerful chess pieces and trump cards in their hands." At this moment before the Great War began, the two of them began to talk. Kale, Thanos, and the leaders of the lineup like Loki would not appear in person. Instead they would play chess in the dark. With the 9 worlds as the chessboard, the people in the lineup would be the chess pieces. They would first compete in a small hidden war. Now was not the time to determine the winner. Instead they were each preparing everything, collecting the trump cards that could win this war, and waiting for the final war to start. New York Midtown High School. Peter, with his shiny and straight hair and dark circles under his eyes, came to the school with his school bag and his admission notice. That's right. After being reprimanded by Aunt May last night, Peter sneaked out in his spider battle suit again. He wanted to find the strange culprit that caused the fire, but he couldn't find any clues after wandering around the nearby city. Only then did he obediently go back to sleep. It's this class. Peter stopped in the corridor of the teaching building and looked up at the class number. After thinking for a while, he turned from the mysterious man back to the real school. I hope there are good-looking girls in this class. Peter had reached puberty and his hormones were bursting. When he stood at the door of the classroom and was about to look inside, a big hand just happened to rest on his thin shoulder from behind. Teacher? Peter felt the strength of the big hand and his body shook violently. What teacher? You are also in this class, aren't you? Since we are so fated, we can sit at the same table. A low and childish voice came. Peter braced himself and turned around, only to see a black teenager who was as fat as a bucket, looking at him excitedly. It's over, my youth. Peter rolled his eyes. Our youth has just begun. My name is Ned. What about you? Ned put his hand on his shoulder as if they were familiar with each other. Peter Parker. Peter and Ned walked into the classroom together. There were many people in the classroom. Men and women were sitting in 2s and 3s. Then I'll call you Peter. Ned's enthusiasm made Peter a little uncomfortable, but anyway, his high school career had officially begun. Chapter 504. Midtown High School, in a grade 1 classroom with televisions, radios, and foldable blackboards. No matter how reluctant Peter was, Ned, who thought they had reached a consensus, still became his desk mate as a friend. The other students were still reporting and choosing their seats. Taking advantage of this time, Ned started a topic with Peter. Peter, which hero do you like the most in the Avengers? Hero? Peter replied without hesitation. Iron Man, oh. Ned became even more excited, his saliva flying everywhere. I like Iron Man too. His Iron Man suit is so cool. Of course he's also very rich. But he's only second in my heart. My favorite is still the symbol of peace. He's the real #1 hero. Peter didn't refute this. Indeed, men, women, old and young in New York City would tacitly leave the #1 hero to the symbol of peace when talking about this topic. This was already a consensus among everyone. When it came to the symbol of peace, no one would compare him to other heroes. After all, the symbol of peace was the first superhero. He ended the long-lasting World War II war, founded the Avengers, and saved the world several times. No other heroes could compare to him in terms of fame and achievements. The symbol of peace's existence was more like a kind of faith, which had long surpassed the framework of heroes. The corners of Peter's lips curled up. If Fatty Ned in front of him knew that he had once fought with the symbol of peace, would he be so shocked that his jaw would fall off? Sitting here and waiting for someone? A male student near the podium in the classroom argued. He took the remote control from the podium and turned on the TV next to the blackboard. The channel that had just been turned on was broadcasting news and current affairs. The thick smoke of the fire immediately attracted the attention of all the students in the classroom. At 6:50 last night, a fire suddenly broke out in Remy's 5-star hotel on the central street of Queens. The fire was so severe that it basically covered the entire 5th floor. Fortunately, there were no casualties. This is all thanks to a mysterious person in a tight red and blue suit. As the female reporter explained, she played a video. In the video, one could vaguely see Spider-Man swinging spider silk and rescuing the victims from the 5th floor to the ground. Ned looked at the news and said in surprise, "Wow, is that a new hero? That guy seems to be able to fly?" No, he shouldn't be able to fly. Peter rubbed his nose. The feeling of watching himself on TV was not bad. Ned continued to comment, "His clothes are more like Iron Man's design style. Could it be that he's imitating the Iron Man suit?" Well, Peter didn't know what to say. After all, the spider combat suit was made by Tawny. It could be said that Ned had inadvertently touched on the truth. Since it's a new hero, shouldn't it have a name? Let me think, how about calling him the Fire Monkey? It's a cool name, isn't it? Ned looked at Peter with great interest, wanting to hear his opinion. Peter corrected him a little excitedly. His name is Spider-Man, not Fire Monkey. Nate was dumbfounded. He was obviously shocked. The other students also looked at Peter with puzzled eyes. Childish. A short-haired female student sitting in the corner quietly reading a book raised her head and glanced at Peter. Well, I also heard it from someone else. Peter spread his hands awkwardly and buried his head in his school bag. The news finally made a stage summary. The cause of the fire has not been determined yet. The police have ruled out an accident. This incident is likely to be caused by someone. Please continue to pay attention to the New York News Channel for the details. Someone? Peter raised his head and recalled the mysterious figure wearing a glass helmet and a cloak, riding a red mist and flashing by last night. Who was that person? At the same time, in a restaurant in New York, a middle-aged man in his 30s with a face full of stubble and vicissitudes of life could no longer be called a young man. He was wearing a waiter suit and squatting in front of the restaurant in a daze, depressed. His name was Scott Lang. He had been in prison for theft for only a few months. Although he had managed to find a low-level job after the divorce, it was difficult for him to get back the custody of his eldest daughter. Scott now needed a sum of money, a considerable sum of money. He estimated that he would not be able to earn that much even if he worked as a waiter for half his life. Perhaps they knew about Scott's current situation. His old friends appeared in front of him in 2s and 3s and gave him a cake-like suggestion. When Scott heard the suggestion of his old friends, he did not think too much and immediately rejected it. Steal again? Please, I've already washed my hands of it. I can't go back to prison. Shoo, buddy, lower your voice. One of the fat men with a beard put his hand on Scott's shoulder and said in a low voice, "We really need you this time. I can guarantee that this will be your last order. As long as you take it, the money you get will not only be enough for you to live the rest of your life, but your daughter will also be back by your side." Scott was silent. He had to admit that he was tempted. He could do anything for his daughter. "Tell me, who is the target?" Scott said in a deep voice. "I knew you wouldn't refuse." The fat man with a beard clenched his fist excitedly and said simply, "The target is a businessman and scientist. He has many properties in New York. He has a villa that has been vacant for a long time. According to my understanding, there is a super safe room there. By the way, the businessman's name is Hank Pym." Late that night, a van with curtains was parked on the road in the villa area. "I'm going." Scott, who was wearing a night suit, got out of the van from the back door after putting on his headset and mask. The other accomplices who stayed in the van operated all kinds of equipment to block the nearby surveillance and signals. They also monitored every movement in the nearby streets. Their level of professionalism was no less than that of an international bandit. After Scott left the van, he approached the target villa. He came to the wall, skillfully and nimbly climbed into the courtyard. After opening the anti-theft window with a tool, he sneaked into the villa like a cat. "Go down the hall. There is a staircase on the right. Go up to the second floor. The target is the third storage room." Following his companion's instructions, Scott turned on the flashlight and came to the storage room on the second floor. When he saw the fingerprint security door, he could not help but smile. This was child's play. Naturally, it was not a problem for him. He taped the old fingerprints left on the handlebars and duplicated the lines. He then used the duplicated fingerprints to pass through the scanning checkpoint. 5 minutes later, Scott did not trigger any alarms and successfully entered the storage room. He saw the 2-meter-long and 1-meter-wide reinforced steel door. "No wonder you guys are looking for me. This is a troublesome guy," Scott exclaimed. "What's wrong?" his companion asked in surprise. "It's Carbondale. It was made in 1910 using the steel from the Titanic." Scott smiled out of habit. "Do you remember the iceberg? It's not very cold." Scott was a former chief engineer. When he was a thief, he was also a top-notch thief. He knew how to pry open the safe at first glance. He drilled a small hole in the main structure of the door. After pouring in a large amount of water, he used liquid nitrogen to accelerate the freezing process. The inside and outside of the door were quickly frozen into ice. Bang! Not long after, the entire door exploded. The door fell to the floor with a loud crash. Hearing the sound of the door breaking, his companion could not hide his excitement. "Quick, take a look. What's inside?" Scott was also very excited. He took a big stride, crossed the collapsed steel door and entered the room. However, it was empty inside. There was only a table. On top of it was a dark red motorcycle suit covered in dust and a strange helmet. "What the hell is this?" Scott's mouth was wide open. He was completely speechless. Chapter 505. In the van parked on the side of the road, The atmosphere in the car was very depressing. The three accomplices stared straight at Scott, their faces ugly as if they had eaten a mouthful of feces instead of a cake. So, after a night of hard work, all we get is this old motorcycle glove? The corners of the fat man's mouth twitched slightly as he looked at the strange clothes in Scott's hand that were stolen from behind the villa's double security door. Another companion added, "To be more precise, it's a weird-looking motorcycle glove. I wouldn't want this second-hand outfit even if it was sold online for $5. What else can we do? Let's retreat first. We've screwed up this time." The fat man sighed heavily and drove the van away from the villa area quickly. Scott looked down at the uniform in his hand. As a former engineer, his intuition told him that this was definitely not a simple motorcycle glove. Why would a motorcycle glove be placed behind Carbondale's security door? Moreover, it was covered with dust. It was obvious that someone had treasured it for many years and had not mistakenly placed it inside. The most important thing was the material used for the suit and the helmet style that went with it. He had never seen anything like it. Scott was filled with doubts as he followed the accomplices back home. No matter what, they had stolen it. They couldn't just put it back, right? The criminal team did not notice that there were dozens of ants on the walls of the target's villa. They were acting as surveillance cameras in different corners, monitoring everything that had happened inside and outside the villa. On the other side, in the basement of a villa, Hank Pym and Hope were still awake. They sat in front of the screen and quietly watched Scott and the others leave in the van. "How was it?" Hank Pym looked at his daughter with a smile. Hope's pretty face was cold. She crossed her arms and snorted. "He's really a thief. I'm referring to his skills, courage, and wisdom." Hank Pym narrowed his eyes. As an Ant-Man, he naturally knew what kind of special talent was needed to become an Ant-Man. Hope did not say anything, as if agreeing. She pondered and said, "Now that the battle suit is in his hands, what's next? Let's go back to sleep. At least let him try it once." Hank Pym was like an old fox. His eyes under the lens carried a meaningful look. The next morning, the glaring sunlight shone through the window onto the bedside. Scott woke up with sleepy eyes. He put on his slippers and went to the bathroom to rinse his mouth and wash his face. He happened to see the dark red uniform that was thrown next to the basin last night. Originally, Scott wanted to wash it in the washing machine first, but after thinking about it, he decided to try it on. He took off his clothes and put the strange uniform on from his feet to his neck. Before putting on the helmet, Scott suddenly took out a test tube filled with liquid from his clothes. It was labeled Pym Particle in English. Pym Particles? Was it placed here? Scott found an inner slot that could fit the reagent at the waist of the uniform. He did not think too much about it. After stuffing the Pym Particle test tube into the inner slot, he put on the matching helmet. Scott put on the strange uniform and stood in front of the basin. He looked at himself in the mirror and muttered to himself, "The style of this uniform is a bit like an ant." Yes, an ant. The main purpose is, Scott saw a red button on the glove of the uniform. He tried pressing it at the same time and then, at the same time. On the roof of the house where Scott was, a cloud of red mist descended from the sky. A mysterious man in a cloak of armor appeared from it. Quentin looked down at the house below coldly. He stretched out his hands and a green whirlwind appeared. As it spun, it became a tornado with a radius of 2 meters in the blink of an eye. It also showed facial features and hands, resembling a physical monster. A wind elemental monster. Go, go. Quentin pointed down the house. The wind elemental monster immediately obeyed and flew down. At the same time in Scott's house. Scott, are you there?" The chubby man had just bought breakfast from outside. He wanted to ask Scott to eat together, but when he opened the door, he realized that Scott was already up. However, no matter how hard he looked in the house, he could not find Scott. "That's strange. That guy is so early. Where did he go?" The chubby man looked at the empty bathroom and returned to the living room in surprise. He did not see that there was a tiny ant-like creature waving at him from the basin. "Scott, since you're not here, I'll finish my breakfast first." The chubby man said one last sentence. He sat on the dining chair and just took out a piece of bread and butter. The door and windows on the first floor were suddenly slammed open by a strong wind. Bang! Along with countless broken stones and glass, the strong wind ravaged everything in the room. The gigantic physical monster formed by the green wind forced its way into the house. It reached out its huge hand and grabbed the chubby man in its hand. Don't kill me." Faced with the sudden change, the chubby man almost wet his pants. What met his eyes was the blurry and terrifying huge face of the wind elemental monster. "Hand over that set of clothes." The wind elemental monster growled at the chubby man. The strong wind that it exhaled blew his hair and cheeks askew. What clothes? The chubby man was stunned and did not react for a moment. The set of clothes you got. The wind elemental monster continued to yell. The strong wind mixed with sand made the chubby man feel pain. The chubby man hurriedly said, Yes, we got a set of clothes, but it's not with me. It's with Scott. But Scott is not at home now. Hand it over or die. The wind elemental monster continued to threaten. Part of its body ravaged and destroyed the furniture and walls in the house. It's really not with me. The chubby man cried miserably. His neck was being squeezed so hard that he almost could not breathe. On the roof of the house. Quentin frowned. The intelligent flying device's scan did not find the man called Scott, nor did it find the existence of the Ant-Man battle suit. How was this possible? A person who had never left the house had disappeared for no reason? Before Quentin could think too much, a black dot suddenly appeared in front of him. He looked up sharply and saw the black dot approaching and enlarging. Soon it turned into a big tree. A tree? Quentin hurriedly flew up to dodge. The pine tree that was uprooted crashed onto the roof where he was originally standing and flattened the head of the house. Quentin's pupils contracted slightly. He flew in the air and looked hundreds of meters away, but he could not see a single person. Who is it? He had actually thrown a tree over from such a far distance. Is this a warning? Quentin lowered his head and thought for a moment. He smiled coldly and chose to retreat with the red mist. After Quentin left, the wind elemental monster in the house turned from solid to incorporeal. It quickly dissipated like a gust of wind. The chubby man immediately collapsed to the ground. He touched his neck with lingering fear. Fatty, are you okay? The bathroom door suddenly opened. Scott, who was still wearing the Ant-Man battle suit, rushed out of the bathroom with a helmet in his hand. He ran toward the chubby man on the ground. Where did you go just now? The chubby man looked at Scott with a pale face. I don't know. Scott shook his head and took a deep breath. I only know that we have to return this suit as soon as possible. Otherwise, something big will happen. Chapter 506. When night fell. Scott took the mysterious Ant-Man uniform and really went to the original Target villa, intending to put the damn thing back behind the safety door. The set of clothes was too strange. It could shrink a person, causing him to almost drown in the water of the basin. It also attracted an unknown wind monster. It's here. Scott looked at the villa in front of him that had no lights on. He sneakily climbed over the wall. The moment his feet touched the ground, the lights in the villa's courtyard were turned on. More than a dozen spotlights shone on him. Oh no! Scott's face changed dramatically. He turned around and wanted to escape, but lights were also on behind him, and then figures came out of the darkness. More than a dozen police officers who had been lying in ambush in the yard, raised their loaded guns and surrounded Scott. Police, you're under arrest. Scott didn't know what to say. He smiled bitterly and said, I just came to return something. Do you think we, the people's police, will believe your nonsense? Handcuff him and take him away. The police captain waved his hand and asked several police officers to handcuff Scott, put him in the police car and return to the local police station. A few flying ants flying at low altitude looked out and reported the scene in detail to the basement of a villa somewhere. I should go. Hank Pym put on a neat suit, adjusted his tie slightly and waved goodbye to Hope in the house. He opened the door of the basement and walked out. Is he more suitable to be an Ant-Man than me? Hope looked at the screen conveyed by the camera and shook his head, unable to accept the fact that Scott was being taken away by a group of police officers. In the detention room of the Wharton Street Police Branch in New York, Scott sat on the single bed and covered his face with his hands. He had just left prison not long ago, and he didn't expect to step into it again. This made him depressed and regretful. He reflected on himself for about 5 minutes. The police came to inform Scott in the detention room that the owner of the villa had summoned him. This made Scott uneasy. He was afraid that the owner of the villa would insist on suing him and make him spend the rest of his life in prison. It could be said that, ever since Scott stepped into Hank Pym's villa, he had completely fallen into the trap and could no longer break free from the control of others. On the interrogation table, Scott and Hank sat on opposite sides of the table and looked at each other for the first time. I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have stolen your clothes. Scott was just about to say something to get the other party's forgiveness when Hank said calmly, Maggie is right. No wonder she didn't want to hand Kathy over to you. Once you hit rock bottom, you'll walk the path of theft. How do you know about Maggie and Kathy? Scott was stunned. My G was his ex-wife, and Kathy was his biological daughter whom he wanted to adopt. Isn't it obvious? This means that I've investigated you thoroughly. Hank was like a confident businessman. He said straightforwardly, "All right, let's not waste each other's time. I'll give you two choices. 1, to spend the rest of my life in prison. 2, when you return to the detention room, listen to my instructions." Who the hell are you? Scott stared straight at Hank. No matter how slow he was, he knew that he had been plotted against. However, now that the other party had something on him, he had no right to talk to the other party. "My name is Hank Pym. I'm a scientist." Hank smiled faintly and didn't say much. He left his seat on the interrogation table and walked straight out of the police station. "Even if I agree, how can I listen to instructions in the detention room?" Scott, who had returned to the detention room, was puzzled. However, after a while he completely understood the meaning of Hank's words. A group of small ants appeared out of nowhere and crawled into Scott's detention room. They even worked together to carry a small uniform. After the ants put the uniform on the ground, with a whoosh, the uniform became more than 100 times bigger and returned to its original size that could be used by humans. "That's the uniform." Scott widened his eyes and looked at the Ant-Man uniform that resembled a motorcyclist on the ground. A flying ant flew up from the ground and stopped not far away from him. It even spoke in Hank's voice, "Put it on and listen to my instructions." "Camera, microphone?" Scott looked at the flying ants in bewilderment. Surprisingly, the flying ants were carrying tiny cameras and microphones. Scott gritted his teeth and put on the Ant-Man uniform on the ground, risking the risk of being discovered by the patrolling police. On the rooftop of the police station building, Quentin stood on the rooftop with his head held high, controlling the unmanned aircraft. When he saw the feedback, a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. "So that's how it is. Was it because your body shrunk that I didn't notice you last time? You won't be able to escape this time." As Quentin spoke, red mist appeared in his hand again. This time the mist swirled and condensed. However, it didn't form a wind elemental monster. Instead, it was mainly yellowish-brown sand, forming a huge sand monster. It was an earth elemental monster. "Bring me the combat suit," Quentin ordered. The earth elemental monster immediately rushed toward the police station entrance. At this time, inside the police station, due to the mysterious disappearance of the detained prisoner, the police station had already sounded the alarm. Under the flashing red light, the police officers began to search in a mess. No one noticed. Scott, who had shrunk to the size of an ant, was under Hank's remote command to avoid being trampled by the police officers. He slipped out of the detention room through the crack in the door and finally came to a corner by the wall. "What's that?" Scott, who came here, was shocked. It was a group of ants. Each of them was the size of a cow. They rushed toward him and surrounded him. "It's my partner," Hank was still explaining. The corner of Scott's mouth twitched as he looked at the ants that were as strong as cows in front of him. "You want me to ride them like a car?" "No, it's not that." Hank had just finished speaking. Following the buzzing sound of a helicopter propeller, a flying ant that was twice the size of an ordinary ant slowly descended from a low altitude in front of Scott. "You want me to ride it like a plane?" "I definitely don't want to." Scott's face was extremely pale. He shook his head back and forth with all his might. "Scott, listen up. You have to sit on it." Hank was just about to open his mouth to persuade him when the door of the police station outside was suddenly blasted open like an explosion. A sandstorm quickly and violently poured in, instantly filling the corridor inside the police station. The flying ant that was hovering at a low altitude was hit by the sand and turned into a pile of mud that stuck to the wall. "This is?" Scott gulped. He looked up and saw a huge monster that was formed by sand at the front of the corridor. It withstood a series of gunfire from the police and was constantly approaching him. This sudden scene stunned even Hank, who was remotely controlling it, and he shouted, "Run, Scott! If I'm not wrong, that monster's target is the Ant-Man combat suit." Chapter 507. "I don't need you to tell me." Scott was horrified. He climbed up the stairs and returned to the police station. "Don't even think about running." In the corridor behind Scott, the earth elemental monster opened its hollow mouth and roared. The sand condensed into a pair of giant palms and slapped a few nearby police officers away. Its half-solid, half-illusory body ignored the gunshots and locked onto Scott, who was as small as an ant, to chase after him. Scott looked back and saw that the ants were all killed by the sand. He couldn't help but feel his scalp tingle. "Its target is definitely the battle suit I'm wearing. I encountered a similar wind monster this morning, and my friend was almost killed. Do you know what kind of monsters these are? I don't know. A few kilometers away, Hank shook his head. His imaginary enemy was the partner of the company who stole the formula for the PIM particles and created the wasp suit. Who would have thought that it would become a monster made of natural elements? Then can I trouble you to contact the Avengers for me? The symbol of peace or Iron Man, either one will do. Only people like them can deal with this kind of situation, right? Scott smiled bitterly and kept running faster. He passed through the gap of the closed iron door, but the earth elemental monster was hot on his heels. It knocked the iron door to the ground with a headbutt. The distance between the earth elemental monster and Scott kept shrinking. I don't know how to contact them either. Hank's eyes showed hesitation. He used to be an agent of SHLD, so he naturally knew how to contact SHLD, but he had left SHLD long ago and did not want to have anything to do with that organization. As for Iron Man, he was that man's son. Hank thought for a while and said in a deep voice, Scott, it's up to us now. I've already sent new flying ants over. Just hold on a little longer. How can we hold on? Scott's face was pale. While he was sprinting, he slid through the gap of the door. However, with a loud bang, the iron door was directly sent flying over his head. It rolled like a natural moat, blocking his escape route. Hank, where are your flying ants? Have you arrived yet? Scott's mouth was so dry that he swallowed his saliva. He retreated all the way to the end and pressed his back against the iron door that was blocking his way. He looked at the corridor in front of him and saw that the earth elemental monster had shrunk its body. Sand surged through the corridor and condensed into a fist that was half the size of a human body. It was like a meteor flying towards him. It's over, it's really over now. Scott subconsciously raised his hands and closed his eyes in despair. He could imagine himself turning into a pile of minced meat. At this critical moment, the wall of the corridor behind Scott suddenly exploded. A dark and strong figure rushed in and shielded Scott. At the same time, a dark fist carrying a strong wind collided with the earth elemental monster's fist. Bang! The earth elemental monster's fist, which was made of sand, immediately exploded like a sandbag. Unable to maintain the shape of a fist, the sand splattered everywhere. This is... Scott opened his eyes in shock and looked up. It was a muscular humanoid monster with a dark appearance. Its body had white tattoos that looked like they were left behind by flames. Its long and narrow eyes were completely white and emotionless. Hurry, get out of here. The dark monster that was blocking the earth elemental monster spoke in human language. Scott glanced sideways and realized that when the monster saved him, it had also crushed the iron door that was blocking it into pieces. He hurriedly nodded and continued to escape into the police station. Thank you, big black guy. Scott did not forget to turn back and leave a word of thanks. I'm a poison agent. Hearing this, the dark monster snorted in dissatisfaction. He was the combination of Eddie and poison. Perhaps Cale had already sensed that something was wrong with Quentin, or perhaps Cale had never trusted anyone other than his own family. That was why he had specially sent Eddie to protect Ant-Man's life in secret. I really don't understand. What's the point of the Master saving someone as weak as an ant? Eddie shook his head. The earth elemental monster took advantage of this moment to reform its solid body with sand and charged violently at Eddie. It's just a puppet. Use your real body to fight me. Eddie crossed his arms. The earth elemental monster crashed into his arms. Due to the huge difference in strength, the solid body made of sand crumbled into sand again. Battle suit, give me the battle suit. The earth elemental monster roared. After its body crumbled, it quickly reformed again and started a fierce battle with Eddie, who was blocking its movement in the police station building. For a moment, the dust on the first floor of the police station was billowing, sweeping through everything inside. Both of them must be monsters. Scott fled into the police station, trembling in fear. The wall had been broken through by the poison agent, so he could see the bustling streets and the vast night sky outside. Buzz, buzz, buzz. A flying ant landed on the ground in front of him. This time, without needing Hank's reminder, Scott jumped onto the flying ant's broad back and grabbed its neck firmly with both hands. He urged, quick, get me out of this godforsaken place. That's right. Hank smiled and immediately controlled the flying ant remotely. The flying ant carried Scott out of the police station and kept rising. Whoosh, a cold gust of wind blew, and the flying ant narrowly dodged to the side. Scott, who was riding on the flying ant, was almost thrown off. What's wrong now? Scott screamed and hugged the flying ant even harder. Hank reminded him seriously, look down and you'll know. Down there? Scott looked down and vaguely saw a strange green figure, carrying a whistling wind behind him. Scott's face immediately paled. "It's that wind monster. Fly faster, fly faster. Don't be noisy, I'm trying." Hank controlled the flying ant to dive down and try to fly toward the narrow alleys of the buildings. The wind elemental followed behind like a small moving tornado, destroying everything in its path. "Damn it, it can really run." Quentin stood on the rooftop of a commercial building nearby and looked down at the chaotic street area caused by the earth and wind elementals. His face turned slightly pale. Quentin definitely did not want to see large-scale chaos. If the Avengers or even the symbol of peace were attracted, things would be troublesome. "Forget it, let's call it a night." Quentin clenched his fists and glanced at the chaotic street below. He rode the red mist and disappeared into the night sky. "I'm going to faint, I'm going to faint." The flying ant carried Scott and flew at high speed. While he was unconscious, the wind elemental that had been chasing them finally disappeared. On the other side in the ruined police station, Eddie looked at the earth elemental that had scattered into a pile of sand in front of him and shook his head. Did it run away again? Hearing the sirens of many police cars, Eddie did not continue to stay. He stepped on the ground and jumped to the rooftop of a building nearby. With a few superhuman leaps, he quickly left the scene. Chapter 508. The next morning. News of the terrorist attack on the New York Police Department last night, the disappearance of a fugitive, and the appearance of the three-headed monster with wind, earth, and darkness characteristics, as well as the chase and fight in the neighborhood, quickly spread among major websites and news media. It had only been half a year since the last war in New York, and now there was the alien war in London. Coupled with the continuous unnatural events in the past 2 days, the people of New York were in a state of panic, and the topic of world security and heroes escalated again. While the outside world was in an uproar, the Avengers, Family Cal, and other supernatural forces fell into silence. They knew very well that this was just a small skirmish, just the ripples before the storm. At this time in a private villa in New York. In one of the rooms on the second floor, Scott slowly woke up from the bed. His head was still throbbing, and he still remembered that when he escaped on the flying ant last night, the intense discomfort caused him to feel dizzy, and he eventually fainted. Scott forced his eyes open and scanned the unfamiliar room. When he saw a mature woman leaning against the door, looking at him quietly, Scott could not help but be stunned. Then he jumped out of bed in shock. "You're awake. Come to the living room when you're awake." The woman glanced at Scott and left the room after saying that. 10 minutes later, in the reception room on the second floor of the villa, Scott sat on the sofa on one side and opposite him sat Hank and his daughter. The Ant-Man uniform was on the table. "Scott, this is my daughter Hope. She will teach you close combat skills and some practical martial arts." Hank waved at Hope as he introduced her. Hope narrowed her eyes and was still carefully sizing up Scott. Hank's eyes fell on the Ant-Man suit and he said in a deep voice, "And I will teach you how to use this Ant-Man suit correctly, the relevant emergency maintenance skills, and how to make friends with ants." Wait a minute." Scott pushed his palms forward and interrupted them, saying, "Why do I have to learn and train these things? You've made me a fugitive and I've been targeted by some unknown monsters. I've almost lost my life." Scott paused and continued bitterly, "It must be a mess out there right now. I might be wanted all over the country." "It's not a possibility. You're already wanted." Hopper casually threw out a newspaper. On the wanted list was Scott's photo and personal information. "I knew it." Scott rolled his eyes and slumped back onto the sofa. Hank said slowly and forcefully, "That's why you should join us and become an Ant-Man to destroy Claw's plan to sell the Wasp battle suit. If I succeed, I will help you get rid of the arrest warrant. Only then can we achieve a win-win situation." "Then let's do it." Scott sighed and shrugged. "I don't have any other choice, do I?" Hank and Hopper looked at each other and smiled. The Ant People training plan was also the official beginning of the Ant People's suffering. During the day, Scott faced special training from Hopper. Although Hopper was a female white-collar worker, she had also learned martial arts and close combat skills in the past. Her combat skills completely outclassed the petty thief Scott. Within a few rounds, Scott was beaten to the ground and could not get up, wailing in pain. At night, Scott followed Hank to learn how to use and repair the Ant People battle suit. They also went through some shrinking and enlarging training. During this period, Scott found the controller of the battle suit troublesome and wanted to use tools to remove it. In the end, Hank found out and severely reprimanded him. If the ant people battle suit doesn't have a controller, once it shrinks, it will become subatomic and enter the quantum realm without the concept of time and space. It will never be able to return to reality again. When Hank said this, there was a trace of unconcealable pain in his eyes. Scott was also secretly afraid and repeatedly promised not to touch the controller again. Just like that. After 5 days of special training, Scott and Hopper's sparring gradually became more and more frequent. Scott's understanding of the Ant-Man battle suit had also improved greatly. Then it was time for the second round of training. Hank called Scott to the office. When Scott walked into the room, he found that there were photos of all kinds of ants hanging on the wall. There were also many professional theoretical and conceptual diagrams of ants. If you want to become an ant people, not only do you have to understand the ant people battle suit, but you also have to be familiar with your partners, the ants, Hank explained. Scott said incredulously, "You want me to be friends with them? How is that possible? Ants can't understand human language." As soon as he finished speaking, more than a dozen ants crawled on the table and put a piece of rock sugar into a hot coffee cup. Scott was shocked by this scene. He looked at the ants in disbelief and then at Hank. Hank pointed to the device on his ear and explained, "This is the device I made. It can communicate with ants in depth. Of course, you need to train day after day. Before the training begins, let me introduce your future companions. They are loyal, brave, and absolutely trustworthy." Hank turned his chair and looked at the 4 ant diagrams hanging on the wall behind him. The first diagram was of a small yellow ant. Mad ants, as fast as lightning, could conduct electricity, and could invade and destroy electronic equipment. The second diagram was of a small but strong ant. The bullet ant's bite was the most painful. The third diagram was of an ant as red as fire. Red ants, they were excellent builders. Their colony could be combined into different forms at will. The fourth diagram was of a black ant with wings. Craftsman ants, suitable for ground and air transportation. Ant people could also use them as flying mounts. "So the flying ants that saved me last time were craftsman ants," Scott muttered to himself. Hank smiled and said, "In the next few days, you have to enter the ant caves in the form of an ant person and become one of the ants. You have to be their companion and communicate with them." Interact with these ants on the spot? Scott's scalp went numb just thinking about it. He suddenly realized that his suffering had just begun. A natural firm, top-floor office. That's the details. Eddie stood on the floor in front of the desk and reported with his head lowered. "Since it's confirmed that Quentin has betrayed us, what else do you need me to say?" Yu Tong's cold voice came from behind Eddie's chair. "But Mr. Kale?" Eddie was about to ask for Kale's opinion when he suddenly stopped. Poison's voice sounded in his mind, "Idiot, that man is here in front of you. I understand, I will get rid of him as soon as possible." Eddie's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He changed the topic and left the top-floor office in a hurry without waiting for Yu Tong's response. After the office door closed. As the office chair turned to face the front, Kale could be seen sitting on it. He was holding Yu Tong in one hand and reading the newspapers of the past few days in the other. A mysterious guest. Kale shook his head gently, a cold smile on his lips. Chapter 509. It had been a week since the attack on the police station. In the office on the second floor of Hank Pym's private villa, Scott was sitting on a chair in his Ant-Man uniform, playing with 4 different species of ants with his index finger, especially the craftsman ant that had saved his life. Scott had even affectionately named it Anthony. Only God knew what kind of unbearable training Scott had gone through to become so intimate with these ants. The many bite marks on his body had yet to completely disappear. Hopper was still wearing a breathable vest, showing off her curvaceous figure. She suggested to her father, Hank, "All right, no matter what, Scott has already become companions with the ants. He can be an entry-level Ant-Man now. It's time to implement our plan. If we delay any longer, Cross will sell out all the Wasp battle suits. To become a real Ant-Man, this level is far from enough. The Ant-Man's specialty infiltration training has yet to begin." Hank stared at Scott. Scott had a bitter expression, thinking that there would be more hellish training. However, Hank changed the topic and sighed helplessly. "But Hopper is right. We're running out of time. We can only push ourselves beyond our limits." "That means?" Hopper looked at Hank with some excitement. Hank said unhappily, "Isn't my meaning clear enough? The plan to infiltrate Pym technology and steal the Wasp battle suits will officially begin tonight." Hopper and Scott were both overjoyed. They had trained hard for 7 days just for this moment. On the large desk in the office, there were many architectural blueprints of PIM technology. Even the sewers and electrical pipes were marked. PIM technology has added a lot of new security personnel during this period. The security will definitely be impenetrable. Hank held the blueprints while explaining the battle plan to Hopper and Scott. The best infiltration plan now is to let Hopper go to the company as the manager first to ensure the internal environment. Then, Scott and the fire ants would work together and enter the company through the sewers to take away the battle suits. If necessary, you can order the mad ants to destroy the server and escape the scene during the short period of blackout. No problem. Hopper nodded. I'm fine with it too. Scott nodded too. After the temporary training, the Ant-Man battle suit and the help of the ants had given him a lot of confidence. Since there are no problems, we'll officially start the operation at 8 o'clock tonight. Among the three of them, only Hank had a solemn expression. He had a premonition that tonight would not be as simple as he had imagined. That day at 8 p.m. Hopper, who wore light makeup and a uniform, followed the plan and punched in through the entrance of PIM Technology Company. He ignored the security guards outside and entered the company without any obstruction. Hello, manager. Many staff members greeted Hope warmly when they saw her coming to the company. Hope nodded with a smile. Is the chairman here? Hope asked the receptionist at the front desk. The receptionist hurriedly said, Chairman Cross is in his office on the 5th floor, but he hasn't allowed anyone to enter his office recently. Do you need me to contact him? No need. I'll go up myself. I have something to talk to him face to face. Hope rejected the receptionist's suggestion. Without waiting for the receptionist's response, she went upstairs in her high heels. On the way to the office on the 5th floor, Hope passed by the 3rd floor and paused for a few seconds in the corridor. Through the partially transparent door, she could see the locked demonstration hall. Inside the exhibition pillar and anti-theft device, the Wasp battlesuit was quietly placed inside. Target confirmed. Scott, act according to the plan. Hope did not stay for long as she whispered into the small walkie-talkie in her collar. I'm on my way. On the other side of the walkie-talkie, Scott's voice came out, accompanied by the sound of rushing water. Below the surface of PIM Technology Company's building, in a sewer that led to the bathroom. Using a group of fire ants as a boat, Scott, who was the size of a bug, was standing on the back of the fire ants and moving forward along the flow of water in the pipe. Another group of fire ants had been waiting above the pipe. They formed a rope and hung in the pipe leading to the 1st floor, waiting for Scott. In less than half a minute, Scott crawled out of the small hole at the bottom of the wash basin in the bathroom and asked Anthony to carry him to the location of the battle suit. He also asked the mad ants near the company's server to prepare. Sounds like it's going quite smoothly. Hope smiled and came to the office on the 5th floor. She wanted to delay Cross for a while so that Scott could smoothly take the Wasp battlesuit away. Cross, are you there? Hope knocked on the office door, but no one responded. Cross. After hesitating for a moment, Hope turned the doorknob. When the door opened, the scene that greeted her eyes shocked her. On the other side, Scott rode on Anthony and entered the demonstration hall through the vent. He saw the Wasp battle suit, the target of this plan, on the pillar of the platform in the hall. Scott jumped down from Anthony's back and returned to human size. Looking at the Wasp battle suit close at hand, he spoke into the walkie-talkie excitedly. Hope, how are things on your side? I've successfully entered the target hall. Let's go. Hope's reply was trembling. Scott, leave that place quickly. What are you talking about? I'm about to get the battle suit. Scott was confused. He reached out to the display pillar with the built-in battle suit. That's a trap. Scott, leave quickly. Evacuate. Hope warned loudly. She was standing in the office on the 5th floor. There was no one else in the room, only a rotten corpse that had been dead for more than 7 days and was emitting a foul stench. Through the clothes and watch decorations on it, Hope recognized at a glance that the person who died in the office was Cross himself. However, if Cross was already dead, then who was the person who pretended to be Cross, announced that he had developed the Wasp battle suit, held a large-scale exhibition and recently increased the company's security? What was his purpose? The more she thought about it, the more terrified she became. Hope could not help but cover her mouth. She was stunned by the facts in front of her. It turned out that the enemy she had been imagining had long been killed, and someone else wanted to steal the battle suit. On the 3rd floor in the demonstration hall, Scott was a little dumbfounded. He looked at the intelligent aircraft in his hands. The Wasp battle suit and the exhibition platform in the room dimmed as a projection illusion. It really was a trap. Immediately after, the PIM Technology Company's internal alarms suddenly sounded. At this moment, on the rooftop of a business building next to PIM Technology, Eddie stood on the wall and looked down at the security guards who were alarmed by the company's alarm. He shook his head regretfully. Am I still too late? What a worrisome person. I have to clean up someone's mess again. Toxin and Eddie's body chuckled. Haven't you always been good at cleaning up people's mess? By the way, I forgot to remind you that someone is following you. Why didn't you say so earlier? Eddie grumbled. He turned around and said coldly, Who's there? Come out yourself, or should I go over and drag you out? *T. I've been discovered. From the shadow behind the water tank on the rooftop, a figure with a red and blue background slowly walked out. There was a conspicuous spider pattern on his clothes. It was Spider Peter, who had just entered high school. Ant-Man, Toxin, and Spider-Man. The three gathered like fate. Chapter 5:10. Under the night sky and the moon, on the rooftop of a tall building. Eddie, who was standing on the 100-meter-tall wall, looked at Spider-Man, who walked out from the shadows. Realization dawned on his face. So it's you? What are you doing here instead of doing your homework at home? You know me? Peter subconsciously took a step back as his identity was directly exposed. He was both surprised and nervous. He originally wanted to go out and try his luck, but he didn't run into the mysterious person who set the fire. Instead, he found Eddie, so he secretly followed him. Eddie smiled but didn't say anything. Not only because Kale paid attention to Peter, but Toxin also came into contact with Peter alone and copied and learned the spider talent from him. After the last battle in New York, Toxin had explained everything to Eddie. For all kinds of reasons, although Eddie had never seen Peter in person, he was very clear that under the cool mask of Spider-Man, there was just a big boy who had just entered high school and was still wet behind the ears. Kid, I don't have time to talk to you now. You'd better go home and sleep well. Eddie pouted as he looked down at PIM Technology, which was already in a mess. He waved his hand perfunctorily at Peter, then leaned back and fell directly from the rooftop wall. Peter was shocked when he saw this. He quickly rushed forward, put his hands against the wall, and poked his head out to look downstairs. Eddie fell naturally. When he was in midair, black liquid suddenly gushed out of his body, and a dark and tough biological membrane covered his body. In less than 3 seconds, Eddie, who was originally an ordinary person, had turned into a strong and dark humanoid monster. His long and narrow white eyes were wild and cold. Let's get to work. Eddie laughed sinisterly, bent his legs slightly, and then stepped on the outer wall of the building. Boom. As the solid outer wall collapsed inwards and a few layers of glass windows shattered, Eddie was like a cannonball that had been shot out of the barrel as he charged towards PIM Technology. Amazing. Who is he? Peter was shocked. At this moment, the scanning device attached to the suit beeped, and a melodious female voice sounded. That's Eddie, an employee of Unnatural Law Firm, an internal member of Family Cal, and a prospective member of the Avengers. He once cooperated with Hulk to defeat countless alien battleships in the Battle of New York. However, due to his multiple identities, his personal information is not known to outsiders. The voice came from the AI of the spider suit named Karen. This was something that Peter had discovered by accident the day before yesterday. Tawny was obviously worried about him, so he had installed a nanny-type AI on the suit. Karen, I almost forgot about your existence. Peter slapped his forehead and looked at Eddie's receding figure. He said slowly, so he's one of Mr. Kale's men. Wait a minute. No matter what, I'm still treated as a child. Recalling Eddie's words, Peter could not help but grit his teeth. The AI Karen said seriously, Peter, you're only about 16 years old. You're still underage. You're indeed considered a child. I'm not a child. I must make some achievements to show Mr. Stark and Mr. Kale. Peter took a deep breath and jumped down the stairs. Along the way he shot out spider silk and swung it in the direction Eddie left. At this time, inside PIM Technology, sharp and frequent alarms sounded everywhere. The security personnel carried firearms and rushed to the demonstration hall on the 3rd floor where the alarms were triggered. Not good, we have to get out of here. Scott's face was pale as he smashed the unmanned aircraft in his hand on the ground and said to Hopper on the other side of the walkie-talkie, Scott, don't worry about me. Get out of here. Hopper's response was extremely weak and carried a hint of fear. What's wrong with you? From Hopper's strange tone, Scott suddenly had a bad feeling. Go, I'm fine. On the 5th floor of PIM Technology in the chairman's office, Hopper was retreating into the room. She was facing a man who looked exactly like Cross standing at the door. "Who are you?" Hopper stared coldly at the man at the door. "You're really here." The mysterious man sized up Hopper and then looked at the rotten corpse on the office chair. He smiled eerily. "You can call me the mysterious guest." While the mysterious guest was talking, the disguised Cross appearance twisted and changed. Under the cover of a red mist, the mysterious guest quickly changed back to the appearance of wearing a glass helmet and a cloak. "What do you want to do?" Hopper forced herself to calm down and continued to ask. "You'll know soon enough." The mysterious guest extended his hands forward. A red mist gushed out and bound Hopper, who was retreating. While Hopper was struggling, the mysterious guest controlled the energy mist and snatched the mini walkie-talkie from her. "You." Hopper's beautiful eyes widened as she looked at him angrily. With the mini walkie-talkie in his hand, the mysterious guest ignored Hopper and said to the walkie-talkie, "If you want to save your girlfriend, bring the Ant-Man battle suit to the 5th floor." Without waiting for Scott's response, the mysterious guest crushed the mini walkie-talkie and looked at Hopper, who was struggling in the red mist. "Damn it." In the demonstration hall on the 3rd floor, Scott clenched his fists. Without thinking too much, he shouted, "Anthony," and pressed the small button on the battlesuit's controller. To the 5th floor. Scott flipped over and sat on Anthony's back. Under his command, Anthony flapped his wings and flew out of the demonstration hall through the air vent, fearlessly flying toward the 5th floor. Along the way, facing the security guards who rushed over, Scott, who had shrunk, arrived at the company's 5th floor without any obstruction. As soon as Anthony flew to the corridor on the 5th floor, Scott saw Hopper, who had collapsed in front of the office door. He jumped down from Anthony's back and returned to his original human size, supporting the limp Hopper. "You shouldn't have come. This is a trap." Hopper struggled to stand up from the ground and gasped. "Even if it's a trap, I still want to come." Scott looked straight at Hopper, his eyes full of determination. Hopper's heart was warmed. Just as she was about to say something, a monster growl came from the side. A brownish-yellow earth elemental monster crawled out of the office, a green wind elemental monster blocked the staircase on the 5th floor, and a blue water elemental monster appeared at the end of the corridor. "Elementals. 4 against 2. Will you obediently hand over the battle suit, or die here with Cross?" The mysterious guest floated in the air on the 5th floor with his cape fluttering in the wind, looking down at Scott and Hopper from above. Chapter 511. The earth elemental monster was formed from hard sand and rocks. Its brown body was the size of a small hill, and every move it made gave people a strong sense of oppression. The wind elemental monster was formed from the whistling wind in the void. Its body was drifting between virtual and physical, and the overflowing whirlwind kept sweeping and washing away the items inside the company. The water elemental monster was formed from the water flowing out of the pipe. As the water flowed out, its water body kept expanding, completely blocking one side of the escape route. There are actually 3 energy monsters of this level? Scott opened his arms to protect Hopper. He looked around and saw the elemental monsters and the mysterious guests surrounding them. He swallowed his saliva. Just one elemental monster was already very difficult to deal with. Scott, who had just become a second-generation Ant-Man, did not have the confidence to win against one of the elemental monsters in a one-on-one situation. Moreover, Scott had to protect the injured Hopper and deal with 3 super-large monsters with different elemental characteristics at the same time, as well as the mysterious guest who was eyeing them covetously. "This is really troublesome." Scott frowned. He could not think of a way to escape at that moment. Even if he shrunk Hopper, the wind elemental monster, which was good at controlling the air, would tear them to pieces before they could even ride on Anthony. "Scott." Hopper's face was pale. She put her delicate hand on Scott's shoulder and said in a firm voice, "You should know that you can't escape with me. You have to leave now. If the Ant-Man battle suit falls into the wrong hands, it will be a disaster for the world." Hopper stopped talking. "I will never leave you behind. Besides." Scott and Hopper were only halfway through their conversation when they raised their eyes to look at the mysterious man hovering in the air in front of them. Scott smiled bitterly as he continued, "He has put in so much effort to set up this situation. Do you think he will just stand by and watch me escape from here? I am the one who got you into this." Hopper clenched her fists and bit her lips. Scott thought of his daughter. He shrugged and said with a smile, "It's too late to say anything now unless there is a miracle. But being able to die with you doesn't seem to be the worst thing." Hearing Scott's words, the mysterious guest spread out his hands and chuckled. "Yes, you can only pray to the heavens now." Boom. At this moment, as if confirming the mysterious guest's words, on the rooftop of PIM Technology, there was a deafening boom as if something heavy had hit it. This is. While the mysterious guest was still in shock, the chandelier hanging on the ceiling of the 5th floor fell and landed on his glass helmet. However, the chandelier did not seem to have hit anything. It went right through the mysterious guest's head to his feet and continued to fall down the stairs without any hindrance. Scott, did you see that? Hopper's eyes lit up when he saw this strange scene. I saw it. Scott nodded. Staring at the mysterious guest, he said in a low voice, speaking of which, the Wasp battlesuit I saw in the demonstration hall just now was also a projection created by the intelligent aircraft. You mean? Hopper looked at Scott in surprise. We might have a chance to escape from here. Scott put his mouth close to Hopper's and whispered in her ear. His hot breath on Hopper's face made her pale face turn pink. What are you guys still discussing? The mysterious guest hovering in the air looked at the two and sneered. All tricks are useless in the face of absolute power. Elementals, what are you waiting for? Go. The 3 elementals heard the order and roared. They rushed toward Scott and Hopper in an encirclement. Scott and Hopper did not move at all, as if they were waiting for something. The moment before the elemental monster approached them, Scott shouted into the walkie-talkie that was tuned to another channel, "Brothers of the Mad Ants, now is the time." In the central computer room of PIM Technology, the yellow mad ants that had crawled to the server and were on standby began to gnaw and conduct electricity when they heard Scott's late order. In less than half a second, the power supply to the entire PIM Technology building was cut off. All the security and water and electricity systems failed. A small pulse of electric current was formed and spread from the server center to the building. In the corridor on the 5th floor, the 3 elementals were about to crash into Scott, but under the spread of the electric current, their movements suddenly froze. Like a movie that was paused halfway, the originally huge and terrifying monster gradually split into dozens of projection beams. The source was the intelligent aircraft that was originally invisible to the naked eye. Yes, there were 20 intelligent aircraft flying in the air inside the company. The projections they released were pieced together into the elementals. Just as I thought. Scott looked at the mysterious guest in the air again. At this time, the mysterious guest's body showed signs of freezing and snowflakes. Obviously, it was also a projection illusion. Anthony! Scott shouted. After Anthony flew down from the corner, he quickly threw a dart. After the dart hit Anthony's body, Anthony's originally small body immediately became bigger than a person. Quick! Take Hopper away. Scott helped Hopper onto Anthony's back. When he saw the intelligent aircraft shooting at him, he slapped Anthony's butt hard to make it fly away. He pressed the button on the controller to shrink in time and avoided the concentrated fire in the form of a small Ant-Man. PIM Technology in a hidden room. Quentin, who was wearing a high-tech helmet and casual clothes, had a gloomy expression. He threw the remote control of the aircraft on the ground. He did not expect the other party to see through it. Those elementals were just a projection illusion of the aircraft. Originally, I wanted to rely on my own ability and not waste too much of the energy given by the Lord. But now I can't care so much. Quentin sighed softly. A faint red glow appeared in his eyes. He opened his hands and 2 streams of red mist energy gathered in his palms and kept spinning and growing. 2 structures. At best, it was a high-tech camouflage, a cross-entry technology that could pass off as the real thing. But this fantasy technology, once combined with the ether energy, the power of reality gems, that could materialize illusions, the effect would be completely different. The enlarged craftsman ant, Anthony, flapped its wings, creating a gust of wind. It carried Hopper through the glass on the 5th floor of the company and disappeared into the vast night sky outside. After successfully sending Hopper out of PIM Technology, Scott was much more relaxed. As he dodged the shots, he sprinted and leaped from the corridor, temporarily returning his body to its original state. He knocked down several flying aircraft that were shooting at him. The moment he landed, he turned into an Ant-Man and fled downstairs. Scott led a group of intelligent aircraft and rushed toward the security guards downstairs. He kept passing through the gaps at their feet. When the intelligent aircraft collided with the security guards, a war between humans and machines was inevitable. Chapter 512. In the corridor and lobby on the 3rd floor of the company, the servers had gone out of control, and the lights inside were pitch black. Only a dozen or so special light bulbs were still dimly lit. When the security personnel who were searching for the intruders collided with the AI aircraft that was chasing after the Ant-Men, the security personnel could not help but be stunned. The AI aircraft also paused for a moment. "Those are the intruders' aircraft. Shoot them down." A voice suddenly came from the security personnel. The other security personnel did not think too much and immediately raised their guns and fired at the flying aircraft. Many of the aircraft were destroyed on the spot. Self-defense mode activated. Target enemy priority changed. The AI aircraft was not to be outdone. Its flashing green light turned red, and then it turned around and fired at the security personnel below. In less than 10 seconds, the war between humans and machines was about to break out. The interior of PIM technology was reduced to a chaotic battlefield of cannon fire. "I'm too smart." Looking at the chaotic battle behind him, Scott, who was in his Ant-Man form, let out a sigh of relief. After getting rid of the flying machine, he ran up to the second floor. Scott changed the channel on the walkie-talkie. After a delayed busy tone, Hank Pym's anxious voice came. "Is this Scott? Are you guys? Have you completed the operation?" "It's fake," Scott answered as he ran. "It's all fake. Not only the Wasp combat suit, even the person in charge of PIM technology is not Cross. It's an unknown enemy in disguise and set up all of this. Their goal is the first-generation Ant-Man combat suit on me." "What did you say?" Hank on the other side of the communicator was also shocked. However, as an Ant-Man, he quickly calmed down and asked, "Are the two of you okay? I asked Anthony to take Hope away from the company. You can go and meet them. I'm still on the company's stairs. I'll be on the first floor soon." Scott came to the last step on the second floor and jumped again. The stairs were like a hill to his body, but the unique characteristics of the PIM particles allowed him to retain the strength and jumping ability of a hominid human, allowing him to jump several meters down the stairs. As soon as he landed on the stairs on the first floor, a large shadow fell towards him. Scott reacted quickly and looked sideways. He saw an earth elemental monster waiting in the hall on the first floor. After seeing him, the earth elemental monster immediately reached out and slapped him. "Again? I won't fall for the same trick twice." Scott had wanted to ignore the earth elemental's attack, but when he saw that the attack was about to hit him, a bell rang in his heart. It was as if something terrible would happen if he didn't avoid it. Without any hesitation, Scott followed his body's instinct and jumped out of the staircase. However, he was still a step too late. The earth elemental's giant palm brushed against his body, and he flew out as if he had been hit hard. In midair, his body also returned to its normal human form from the Ant-Man. The earth elemental monster's palm continued to fall and pressed against the tempered glass corridor. The corridor immediately broke and collapsed, turning into countless glass shards. A few of the shards fell beside Scott, who was lying on the ground and holding his injured left shoulder. His pupils contracted violently as he looked at the earth elemental monster roaring and raging in disbelief. This time it was real. A real earth elemental monster, not a fake projection. "Are you okay, Scott?" Hank heard the loud noise and asked Scott anxiously. "I'm fine for now, but I might be in trouble soon." Scott smiled bitterly. He struggled to get up from the ground and stared at the earth elemental monster that was approaching him. He took out 2 capsules from his pocket. These were the secret weapons he had prepared for the earth elemental monster when he was training with the Ant-Man. Come on, come on. If it's just one earth elemental monster, I should be able to win." Scott breathed rapidly to calm himself down. The earth elemental monster didn't care so much. The 5-meter-tall giant made of sand and stone took a step forward, and a pair of rock-like fists smashed towards him. The moment the fists fell, Scott moved. First, he jumped forward to dodge the fists, and at the same time he passed under the earth elemental monster's crotch. He threw the capsule that he had been holding in his palm at the lower part of the monster made of sand and stone. The super-small capsule hit the earth elemental monster's foot, and with a bang sound, it turned back into a super-large capsule with a radius of 3 meters. After the thin rubber cover of the outer shell was broken, the water inside the capsule exploded like a deep-water bomb. Water counters Earth. After being hit by a large amount of water, the earth elemental monster howled. Its limbs made of sand and stone collapsed, and its huge giant body also fell to the ground. "It's working." Scott's eyes lit up. After he escaped from the police station last time, in order to deal with the earth elemental monster, he specially made the water ball capsule weapon. He didn't expect that it would really come in handy. One water ball capsule after another, more powerful than the bombardment of artillery shells, continuously smashed on the earth elemental monster's body, causing the sand and stone that made up its body to continuously dissipate. When Scott threw out the last capsule, the water destroyed the core of the earth elemental. After the red energy hidden inside dissipated, it completely turned into a mass of wet sand. Phew, fortunately there is enough stock. Scott breathed a sigh of relief. But under his gaze, the accumulated water in the hall on the first floor suddenly gathered together on its own, and like the previous sand, it formed the limbs and facial features. Water elemental monster. Again, is there an end to this? Scott's smile froze on his face. He felt a chill on the back of his neck. He looked back with a pale face, but it was a green tornado that swept away the sand and glass along the way. Wind elemental monster, this is troublesome. Scott didn't prepare in advance to deal with the wind elemental monster and the water elemental monster. Only escape? Scott just thought of this, and above his head, from the roof of the company building, there was another roar of a heavy object falling. Gotcha! A crack bloomed on the ceiling of the 5th floor, and then the crack continued to expand. Finally, the ceiling collapsed and 2 figures, one black and one red, fell from above. I told you not to chase me, go back and do your homework, kid. I won't. Change the way you call me. As if realizing that they were about to fall to the ground, the 2 entangled figures let go of each other tacitly. One of them directly touched the bottom of the floor with his feet, and the floor cracked under the powerful impact. The other person shot out spider silk midway, and slightly swayed in the air to cushion the fall speed. You are? Scott looked at the 2 people who came from the sky with a blank face. One of them was tall and burly with dark and white flame patterns, and his strong muscles seemed to be the strongest armor. The other person had blue and red spider stripes, and his body was relatively short, but the tight uniform still showed the texture of muscles. It was Poison Agent Eddie and Spider-Man Peter. Chapter 513. After nightfall, the lights in New York City lit up, the stars flickered, and the late summer night breeze was cool and pleasant. Looking from the outside. Now PIM technology was in total darkness. Gunshots, explosions and human screams could be heard from time to time from inside the building. In the unguarded yard outside the company building, a spark suddenly lit up, and then the spark spun into a wheel at high speed, and a gorgeous and wonderful circular portal was completed. A foot wearing high heels and black stockings stepped out of it. An extremely beautiful woman walked out of it. Her facial features were tight and fair, and her long black hair fluttered in the wind, as if she was a beauty who walked out of a portrait. The woman raised her pale silver eyes and looked at the place where she arrived. She opened her mind slightly and said softly, "Boss, they have started. It's time." Accompanied by a calm and cold deep male voice, a silver-haired young man walked out of the portal. His chiseled face was not handsome, but it had an indescribable mature charm. He looked like an ordinary person, but his every move contained enough pressure to shake the air. At Kale's level, he had already completely taken the power of the Protoss bloodline as his own, and it was no longer just a card draw. Instead of calling him a god, it was more appropriate to call him a demigod, but he was the strongest demigod. Boss, should we intervene? Yu Tong winked playfully. She was charming and calm on the outside, but only in front of Kale would she show her girlish side. No need. It's just a mysterious guest, he just borrowed part of the gem's power. Kale had no intention of making a move tonight. An ordinary villain who could only use projection illusions, even with the gem's power, was not half as good as Thanos' generals. And there were also Poison Agent, Ant-Man and Spider-Man. With these 3 heroes of the new generation, it would be bullying if he and Yu Tong joined the battle. King against king, general against general, and pawn against pawn. Let's just watch. Sensing that someone was running out of the yard, Kale waved his left hand, and a magic seal appeared on the ring on his finger. Corresponding to the spell card in his body, it immediately played the spell effect. A ripple of glass swept through the air. Kale and Yu Tong were still standing in the courtyard, but it was a world away from the courtyard in the real world. 2 security guards, covered in dirt and covered in wounds, ran out of the house in a sorry state. They turned a blind eye to Kale who was standing at the door. Mirror world. It was one of the best spells used by Earth's mages to observe the real world. It was also the main reason why they were difficult to be detected by the world. Even if they knew their existence and location, others would not be able to find them. Let's go. Kale walked in front and led Yu Tong into PIM technology. As soon as they stepped into the hall, 2 figures wrapped in waves of water rushed toward them. After passing by them, they slammed hard against the inner wall of the hall on the 1st floor, splashing water everywhere. Kale looked sideways and saw that Spider-Man and Ant-Man were drenched and lying on the inner wall. Because they were both wearing hoods, their faces could not be seen clearly. They looked like brothers in distress. Yutong almost laughed out loud. She covered her mouth and looked at Kale beside her. They still need to be trained and grow. Kale shook his head. The little Spider-Man and the second-generation Ant-Man were both like ducks on a perch. They were born a year or two earlier than the original story. These two insect heroes were the true, new generation. Rumble. In the battle at the front of the hall, the one who truly had the power to fight against the water elemental and wind elemental monsters was the poison agent, black demon, lethal guardian, Eddie. He was also the only mysterious dark hero who had multiple identities and multiple nicknames. His performance is not bad. You can consider giving him a raise, Yutong commented with a smile. How is this not bad? Kale still shook his head and squinted at the poison agent who was at a disadvantage under the siege of the water and wind elementals. Poison is far better than venom in terms of talent and growth, but now even the two elemental monsters created by the energy of the gems can't be defeated head-on. Even if he was at the peak of human beings in World War II with the underage venom, it is estimated that he could kill several of these elemental monsters. Boss, times are different. Yutong reminded Kale in a disguised way that in peacetime, the requirements for actual combat should not be too harsh. After all, unlike during wartime, people would save up every day and throw themselves into battle and killing. Of course I know. Kale nodded gently. The gap between the new generation of heroes and the old generation of heroes is basically the gap in combat experience. This is also why the little Spider-Man, who is far superior to Captain America in terms of strength and talent, is still not as powerful as Captain America. That piggy? Hero? Should we run first? Scott got up with the help of the inner wall and suggested to Peter next to him. It's Spider-Man. Peter also got up with difficulty, first correcting Scott's mistake, and then resolutely said, no matter what, I have to fight. If I give up here, then I won't be a hero, and I will fail to live up to the expectations of those two gentlemen. He stretched out his hands forward, and the spider silk shot out separately and stuck to the railing on the second floor. Under the pull of several tons of extraordinary power, the entire metal railing was pulled down and smashed on the head of the water elemental monster, slightly relieving the pressure on the poison agent who was confronting it head-on. Peter wiped the water droplets from his eyes and continued to rush forward to join the battlefield. These days, even underage children are so desperate. How can I back down? Scott sighed helplessly. He wanted to escape, but Eddie and Peter chose to stay and fight, making him give up the idea. For some reason, there is always a thought of not wanting to fall behind them. Moreover, the enemy behind the scenes who controlled these two monsters has repeatedly attacked him, and even a clay figurine has a bit of a temper. If he can get rid of the other party here. Scott had an idea and looked ahead at the poison agent and Spider-Man who were fighting with the water and wind elemental monsters, and shouted at them, these elemental monsters were all created by a man. It's useless even if we get rid of the elemental monsters. We have to find the man behind the scenes. I can't leave here. Eddie crossed his hands and took a hard punch from the water elemental, standing with his head held high under the impact of the water. Karen, can you find him? Peter used the spider silk to swing high, avoiding the slap of the wind elemental monster, and lowered his head to ask the AI that came with the battle suit. Karen quickly replied, below. A weak electromagnetic signal is coming from the basement 10 meters below the company. Fortunately, the server of the company building was destroyed by the mad ants, and a scan easily found the location of the suspected enemy behind the scenes. It's in the basement below, but I can't leave now. Peter was halfway through his words when he was sucked in by the tornado of the wind elemental. Hold on, I'll go. Scott shouted, pressed the controller, turned into the size of an insect, and jumped into the broken underground pipe. Finally found the key to victory. In the mirror dimension, Kale smiled faintly, looking at the poison agent and Spider-Man who were fighting side by side in front of him. He felt inexplicably happy. Chapter 5:14. In his previous life, it seemed that no matter which version it was, Spider-Man and the symbiotic creatures were both enemies and friends. And there were many similarities between the two, such as the style of external armor, superhuman strength and physique, the ability to shoot silk, and so on. It was just that Spider-Man was good at defeating his opponents with skill, while the symbiotic creatures were more inclined to defeat their enemies with violence. Chi. Two spider silks popped out from the tornado created by the wind elementals and stuck to the left and right inner walls of the hall on the first floor. Holding the other end of the spider silk tightly in his palm, the little Spider-Man Peter hung in the air with difficulty, no longer being ravaged by the tornado like a washing machine stirring clothes. I can't hold on any longer. Peter's voice was a little distorted in the strong wind. If he wasn't wearing the spider hood at this time, his mouth would have been blown open by the wind. Under the several tons of grip, the spider silk he was holding still kept slipping away, and his small body was about to be sucked back into the tornado. A dark and tall figure suddenly jumped up. A large hand reached out and grabbed him by the collar as if he was a chicken, bringing him away from the tornado. Thank you. Peter looked back and saw that it was the poison agent who was confronting the water elementals. Boy, hurry up and go back. You can't help here. Eddie gasped for hot air, his mouth opened ferociously, and his tongue swung left and right like a snake's tongue. In the more than 10 years of wandering in the stars, the poison had attached itself to many alien species and monsters, so its deformed appearance was far from pure venom. But at this time, Peter felt that the hideous and terrifying poison agent in front of him, like a dark villain, was as amiable as his predecessor. Peter was suspended in the air with one hand by Eddie, his limbs hanging down, and said stubbornly, "Mr. Eddie, I want to fight, let me continue to fight." "I can help you. I can definitely help." "How do you know my name?" AID was stunned for a moment before he retreated without hesitation. A water column with a radius of 3 meters crashed down on the spot where the two of them had been standing just a moment ago. The water elemental monster let out a furious roar. After its attack failed, it continued to attack with its palm, and half of its palm turned into a 5-meter-tall wave of water. The wind elemental monster cooperated and created a strong gust of wind. Under the support of the wind, the waves also had the characteristic of rotation, flowing quickly and quickly. In an instant, under the combination of the two elemental monsters, Feng Shui and Feng Shui, in the lobby on the first floor of PIM Technology Company, strong winds blew and waves surged, forming a destructive scene at the corner of a large-scale storm on the sea. Eddie's pupils contracted slightly as he jumped onto the inner wall. Just like Peter, he was able to ignore Newton's law and hang upside down on the wall. He looked at Peter in his hand and sighed helplessly. "All right, then what can you do?" Peter was overjoyed at the unexpected good news and said with excitement, I have great strength." He reacted very quickly. When you sense danger, your body shudders. While wearing this spider suit, you can use the AI lady to observe the enemy. Are there any moves or skills? Eddie began to run along the inner wall as the waves chased after them, wanting to completely drown the two of them. "Moves?" Peter muttered to himself. Suddenly he thought of something and said, "There is a sure kill mode, but I can't use it now. Oh right, my spider silk can be transformed into other characteristics such as the conductive electric shock web." Eddie's body suddenly paused as he was almost swallowed by the waves that flooded the lobby. He ran to buy time while asking to confirm, "Discharge electricity, are you sure you can discharge electricity?" Peter looked down at his hands and gritted his teeth. "I'm not sure after all, I haven't used that mode much, but I can give it a try." "Then let's give it a try." At the same time, Eddie took a deep breath and looked at the wind elemental monster in the lobby. He suddenly took the initiative to step on the inner wall and jumped over like a cannonball. The waves with the support of the strong wind came crashing towards him. Eddie crashed into the waves and splashed countless water. "Go Spider Boy." Unable to move forward under the pressure of Feng Shui, Eddie's right hand muscles bulged. Using all the strength in his body, he threw Peter forward like a grenade. Peter only felt the waves and wind pressure churning. His vision blurred and he broke out of the strong Feng Shui waves. Inertia continued, and he fell into the body of the wind elemental monster. On the shiny black goggles of Peter's spider hood, 2 clusters of crimson energy were reflected. These elemental monsters that did not have a limited form actually had an unknown energy cluster in their bodies as the source. In a short moment, Peter understood Eddie's intention and subconsciously raised his hands and made a gesture of shooting spider silk. Now, 2 spider silks shot out, but unlike before, the spider silk this time was conductive. As soon as it touched the red energy cluster, it immediately burst out with a pulse of electric current. Buzz, although the electric current attached to the spider silk was small, it was enough to determine the outcome of the battle at this moment. As the electric current destroyed the energy core of the gem, the original wind elemental monster could no longer maintain its form. Walla walla. A large amount of water spurted out from the first floor of PIM Technology, and the windows and doors became drainage outlets. It rushed out of the yard and gradually subsided. Everything on the first floor had been washed away, leaving nothing but emptiness. Only on the wet and clean floor, Poison Agent and Spider-Man sat back to back. The former released the symbiotic form, while the latter took off his hood, his chest heaving up and down as he panted. "Kid, you're not bad. I approve of you," Eddie said slowly. Peter was surprised. "How did you know that their weakness is in the core?" "I guessed." Hearing Eddie's answer, Peter was stunned. "Guessed? You just threw me over? You weren't sure if you could successfully release the electric shock." Eddie spread his hands and complained to Peter. "It's a pass." In the mirror world, Kyle calmly commented as he watched everything that was happening in the hall. His early training was not in vain. "Now let's see what happens next." Yu Tong smiled charmingly. In the sewer of PIM technology, Scott stood on the back of a group of fire ants and flowed down with the current. After many twists and turns, he followed the water pipe and finally broke out of the drainage pipe. This was a basement warehouse where high-tech equipment was stored. A lot of equipment was stored here. There was an old-fashioned generator in the basement that still provided electricity for this floor, and the lights were still on. As soon as Scott entered the room, he saw the mysterious guest, Quentin, who was wearing a glass helmet and sitting on a computer chair in the basement. Quentin also noticed him and coldly raised his head to look at him. Scott took the initiative to return to human size and said in a deep voice, "So, from the beginning until now you're just one person. And there are 3 of us. 3 against 1, you're bound to lose." "Look behind you." Quentin smiled. "Are you trying to trick me? I've completely seen through your little trick." Scott snorted coldly but felt a heat coming from his back. He frowned and moved his eyes behind him. He saw a pile of equipment burning fiercely, and the lava gradually condensed into a brand new giant monster. The fire elemental monster that had never appeared before finally appeared. Quentin smiled. "You think I didn't think of this situation? You're not the only ones with backup plans, I have one too." Chapter 5:15. Quentin's laughter rang in his ears. Scott looked up in surprise. The fire elemental monster that appeared in front of him was the same as the 3 elemental monsters from before. It had a huge and burly monster body constructed from specific elements. However, fire elemental monsters had characteristics that were completely different from other elemental monsters. After the fire elemental monster was created, it did not attack Scott immediately. Instead, it burned and devoured the equipment and parts of the building in the basement. Even the iron frames and reinforced concrete were melted into hot lava. The lava strengthened the fire elemental monster's body. It looked as if it was constantly devouring foreign objects to achieve its goal of self-growth. In less than 10 seconds, the fire elemental monster had transformed from a 3-meter-tall body into a 6-meter-tall lava giant. Its head melted through the ceiling of the basement. Its bloated lava body filled half of the basement. The high temperature made Scott sweat profusely. He subconsciously took a few steps back. Perfect. This is the perfect ultimate war monster. It truly exists and is not a fake body created by a secondary projection setting, Quentin mumbled to himself. His face was filled with fanaticism. He looked at the fire elemental monster with an infatuated expression. The fire elemental monster's act of devouring foreign objects to strengthen itself did not show any signs of stopping. Instead, its devouring speed increased. The flames and high temperature enveloped the entire basement. Even Quentin's glass helmet was filled with mist. "What have you done?" Scott's face grew paler. This fire elemental monster gave him a terrible feeling. If the earth, wind, and water elemental monsters from before were considered powerful enemies that were difficult to deal with, then this fire elemental monster was like the incarnation of disaster. If he could not stop it here, there might be terrible consequences. Quentin took off his glass helmet. His face was red under the illumination of the flames. He explained excitedly, "In the secondary simulation data, the fire elemental monster is the most powerful battle-type creature. In order to create its physical body, I used up all the energy that the Lord gave me. The amount of ether energy that supplied the fire elemental monster to move was more than the total amount of ether energy from the other 3 elemental monsters. This finally allowed the fire elemental monster's special talent to show. Devour, evolve. The fire elemental monster could burn and devour any object to strengthen its body. It would continue to evolve and grow until it completely destroyed the life planet it was on. As long as I have it, I won't be afraid of symbols of peace or Iron Man. Even if they arrive now, it's too late." Quentin could not help but smile. He strode past Scott and walked towards the fire elemental monster. The fire elemental monster seemed to have sensed something. It stopped burning and devouring and lowered its head to look at Quentin, who had arrived in front of it. No emotions could be found in the eyeless molten lava frames. Fire Elemental, I'm your master, Quentin. Let us create an era that belongs to us. Burn all the obstacles that dare to block our path into nothingness. Quentin opened his arms and exclaimed passionately. The Fire Elemental nodded as if it understood. Quentin turned around excitedly and pointed at Scott. Now kill that little ant. It's time for this farce to end. Only by killing him will that old man Hank Pym yield. The Fire Elemental monster continued to nod. It slowly raised its molten lava left hand and slapped forward, sending Quentin, who was standing in front of it, flying. Quentin flipped a few times in the air and crashed into the inner wall of the basement with a thud. He then slowly slid down. Quentin immediately spat out blood after taking that slap with his human body. Not only was his external body severely burned, his internal organs were also injured by the impact. He would not survive. This dramatic scene stunned the tense Scott. Even Quentin, who was lying on the ground, severely injured and on the verge of death, widened his eyes. Why? Quentin wanted to scream, but his throat was burned by the molten lava. He could not speak with an accurate pitch. At the last moment of his life, Quentin suddenly understood, to the Fire Elemental, the biggest obstacle in its path was not anyone else but itself, its useless creator. This way no one can stop you. Quentin closed his eyes in peace when he thought that Earth would be destroyed by the Fire Elemental in the end. He actually killed the person who created him? Playing with fire? Scott's heart was in turmoil. His body was tense. He looked at Quentin's body on the ground and then looked at the Fire Elemental monster. After killing Quentin, the Fire Elemental monster's empty molten lava eye sockets also looked at Scott. It opened its mouth to both sides as if it was laughing. A giant molten lava hand was raised high again. Not good. Scott's expression changed. He turned and ran. He did not rush to the basement door at the side. Instead, he rushed to the bathroom inside. He aimed his gaze at the drain hole. His thumb, which had already been placed on the control button of the Ant-Man battle suit, suddenly pressed down in coordination. Pym Technology Company, first floor lobby. Eddie had just reached out to pull Peter up from the ground. Their hair was still wet. Just as they were about to say something, they suddenly frowned and looked down at the ground. At the same time, they sensed an extremely ominous and destructive aura. Toxin whispered a warning, "Eddie, be careful. Something terrible has appeared underground." Eddie nodded solemnly. His body was covered with the dark keratin membrane again. He entered the battle form of the symbiotic demon. Peter also arched his body slightly. All the hair on his body stood on end. A chill lingered in his heart. This is... In the mirror dimension, Kale's calm face finally showed some surprise. Crack. A crack bloomed from the floor of the lobby. Then it kept forking and branching. The cracks were quickly densely packed like a spider web. A powerful flow of energy surged to the ground from below. At this moment, Eddie and Peter reacted extremely quickly. One on the left and one on the right, they dodged to the sides in advance. Almost as soon as they left the center of the lobby, the floor cracked from the bottom to the top. Scorching red molten lava spewed out from it, shooting up to 10 meters high. It was like a disaster scene of a small volcanic eruption. Under the shocked gazes of Eddie and Peter, there was first a molten lava hand, then a molten giant head. The entire body of the Fire Elemental crawled out from the ground. The surrounding objects covered in molten lava began to burn and melt, becoming a part of its body. No way, there's another one? Peter opened his mouth wide in horror. It's different. It's completely different. This one is completely incomparable to the previous ones. Eddie opened his long and narrow white eyes wide. He clenched his dark fists as if he was facing a great enemy. Quick, get out of here with me. Returning from the size of an ant to its human form, Scott appeared out of nowhere and shouted at Eddie and Peter. Chapter 5:16. Poison Agent Eddie, Spider-Man Peter, and Ant-Man Scott rushed out of Pym Technology. Almost as soon as they stepped out of the door, the company building behind them collapsed with a rumble. Hot lava spewed up dozens of meters high, illuminating the night sky red. That night, people in New York could see it if they looked up. Rumble, the bubbles burst, hot smoke rose and lava spread out. The entire Pym Technology building was as fragile as a plastic toy, constantly melting by the lava spewing out from within. The original site of the company turned into an active volcano in a short time. With a deafening roar, the human-shaped Fire Elemental crawled out from the ground. After swallowing more than half of the building, its burning lava body grew several times larger, reaching a height of 10 meters. It was like a demon from hell. Its existence was a disaster. The air within 100 meters of it rose rapidly after its appearance. The dozens of police cars that rushed to the road at the entrance stopped together. After the police got out of the cars, they looked at the fire elemental with pale faces, not daring to go any closer. In the end, it was the team leader who reacted first. He picked up the police communicator from his waist and dialed, "This is 101 Picton Street. Hurry up and contact the fire truck. No, contact us, HLD, and the unnatural firm. Tell them to send special personnel as reinforcements. This is not something we can deal with." The team leader looked away from the fire elemental. He waved his hand and issued an order to the rest of the police. "Everyone retreat a certain distance. Take the nearby residence 1 kilometer away and block the main traffic roads within 3 kilometers. Forbid vehicles and pedestrians from approaching this area." After all, he was a police officer who served as the leader of a police station in New York City. After experiencing the battle in New York not long ago, he knew that there were some things that the police could not solve. They could only wait for real personnel to solve them. In today's crazily collapsing world, without a symbol of peace and the existence of superheroes, Earth will probably evolve into a real hell. The team leader sighed. He took one last look at the fire elemental and turned to leave without hesitation. At this time, in the yard of PIM Technology, the grass withered rapidly under the scorching heat. Eddie and the other two stood side by side on the grass, looking up at the fire elemental that was still devouring and growing. Scott said anxiously with a dry mouth, "If we don't stop it here, it will devour New York City and spread the fire to other countries and continents until Earth is destroyed. The problem is, how do we stop it? Its weakness is in the innermost part of the lava." Peter smiled bitterly. He tried to stretch his hand forward and shoot the spider silk, but before it could touch the fire elemental, the spider silk burned to ashes in the air. Scott clenched his fists tightly and sighed. "If I had known, I wouldn't have used up all the water ball capsules. I should have been able to deal with it in its initial small form. But now I really can't do anything." Eddie, who was still in the symbiotic state with toxin, didn't say anything. He kept staring at the fire elemental that was getting bigger and bigger. No one knew what he was thinking. In the mirror space, even Yutong raised her eyebrows and looked at the fire elemental that appeared in the real world through a layer of world membrane. She looked at Kale. "Boss, it's time for us to make a move, right? The 3 people outside can't deal with that thing." "Wait a little longer." Kale's face was still calm. "Wait for what?" Yutong tilted her head and asked. "This time it might be an opportunity." Kale replied calmly. In the mirror world, his eyes were fixed on Eddie and didn't move at all. "If it's you, you might be able to do it. You've thought of this too, Toxin. Let me see what the purpose of your mutation is." Kale thought to himself. There was a huge connection between him and Toxin. As for whether this connection would develop in a good or bad direction, he might be able to see some signs tonight. This was also the biggest reason why he allowed Toxin to stay on Earth. Scott and Peter were like ants in a hot pot. They were still racking their brains to think of a solution. At this moment, Eddie, who was standing in the middle of them, suddenly took a step forward. Scott and Peter looked over in surprise. "You guys step back a little. As for it, I'll stop it." Eddie stared straight at the fire elemental and said in a hoarse voice. Scott's eyes widened and quickly said, "You alone? How can you stop it? That's lava incarnation, nearly 1,000 degrees Celsius." "I know, of course I know this." Eddie's chest rose and fell. He looked at the fire elemental with his long and narrow white eyes and said inexplicably, "But I don't know why, I always have a feeling that it's just this. It's like I've seen fire and high temperature more powerful than this." This was not only Eddie's doubt, but also a reflection of Toxin's heart. At the same time, Eddie didn't wait for Scott and Peter to respond. He continued to move forward and directly walked towards the fire elemental. "Eddie." Peter reached out to pull him back, but the fire elemental roared and a large amount of hot lava splashed out. Peter's face changed. He could only retreat with Scott and keep a safe distance of 30 meters from the fire elemental. At this time, Peter looked forward again, but Eddie's figure had already disappeared in the lava. "Crazy, that guy is crazy. Isn't he courting death?" Scott shook his head vigorously, not knowing what to say. In the fire elemental's huge body, the lava was like a sticky tide flowing back and forth, but it was a hot lava tide of over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Eddie, who was in Toxin's symbiotic form, entered here. The muscles all over his body tightened, and the dark cuticle bulged. He resisted the high temperature with his strong body and showed no signs of being swallowed by the lava. It It was born not afraid of fire and had an extremely high resistance to fire. This was something that Toxin knew when he was born, but he didn't know that he could be safe and sound in the lava of over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Sure enough, it's like this. Toxin's voice sounded in Eddie's mind. What's wrong, Toxin? Poison, what did you think of? Eddie was still confused. Toxin whispered, I always thought that it was normal for me not to be afraid of fire, but all the symbiotic creatures I met before were afraid of fire. Without exception, I was the only one who was special. What does this mean? Eddie asked. Two possibilities. First, I lost a part of my past memory and gained a high resistance to fire from a fire-type creature. Second, I might have been killed by someone's fire once. Toxin's tone was cold and complicated. He manipulated the merged body with Eddie, ignoring the hot lava, and entered the fire elemental's body to find the ether energy cluster as the energy core. He opened his left hand and pressed against the energy cluster. With a little force, he crushed the energy cluster. Chapter 5:17. Half of the fire elemental monster's body was still stuck in the ground. The lava that had condensed into its body was collapsing from head to toe. The lava sizzled and spread across the courtyard, turning into a ball of boiling lava that stood on the spot. That's it? What happened inside? Peter scratched his head in confusion. He had thought that it would be a fierce battle. He did not expect that it would end so anticlimactically. It should be, right? You're asking me? Who should I ask? Scott was also surprised. Well, suddenly the lava on one side parted. Eddie walked out in his poisonous form. The lava still stained the surface of his dark body. If the flowers and plants on the ground had not been melted by the high temperature, Peter and Roland would have thought that the lava was just an illusion. Eddie shook off the lava on his body and glanced at Peter and Scott. Scott was just about to greet him when Eddie suddenly jumped up on the spot. Accompanied by a blast of air, he jumped dozens of meters high and landed on the outer wall of a tall building. He then climbed up nimbly and soon disappeared among the tall buildings shrouded in the night. Ugh! Scott's hand froze in the air. He withdrew it awkwardly. What's wrong with that guy? Peter shrugged at him. He looked around at the deserted streets and suggested, let's get out of here quickly. Yes, escape is more important. Scott then remembered that he was still a fugitive. He quickly nodded, pressed the battlesuit's controller, and turned into the size of an ant to escape. It's been a long night. Hopefully, I still have the energy to wake up and go to school tomorrow. Turning his sore arms left and right, Peter looked at the PIM technology company that had been reduced to ashes. He squatted down slightly and jumped up. He spat spider silk in the air, shuttled between the tall buildings, and disappeared into the night sky of the city like Eddie. In the divine palace above the 9 realms. As expected, a mere mortal is still an unreliable piece of trash even if he's endowed with energy from the origin stone. Loki, who had disguised himself as Odin with a spell, sat in the glorious and silent palace with a gloomy face. He tapped the floor with his golden scepter. However, he had expected this. After all, Earth was the territory of a group of superheroes. It was not that easy to intervene. The mysterious guest, Quentin, was only a slightly stronger cannon fodder, a tool to explore the chessboard of Earth's forces. To deal with them, I have to rely on superior candidates with special talents who are stronger. Loki pondered for a moment and flipped his right hand. The tesseract appeared and he used it to open a small cloud of spatial fog. Through the wormhole he could see that on the other side was a basement space, where 2 humans, 1 male and 1 female, were imprisoned. Both of them were in their early 20s. The man had a head of vigorous silver hair and was handsome. The woman had long crimson hair and was sexy and beautiful. They also vaguely carried the strange energy related to the infinite primordial stones. It's you guys. Loki revealed an exclusive evil smile. At the same time, that night in Tony's personal studio at the headquarters of Stark Industries, Tony Stark did not know that Peter was participating in the battle on the street. He was now busy in the studio with Jarvis, who was fully invested in computing power. Phew. Jarvis tested again. Tony, who was wearing a singlet, wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked seriously at the large composite manufacturing machine that was built with complex parts and had a great sense of craftsmanship. Yes, sir. Jarvis responded quickly and operated the laser scanning machine from top to bottom. The test is correct. All parameters are normal. In theory, as long as there are enough materials and energy, it can build a brand new driving armor in 3 minutes. It will be controlled automatically by the second artificial intelligence derivative system. It can be thrown into the emergency battle to protect Earth in 5 minutes. Finally, it's done? Tawny looked at the production machine. His tired body slumped down on the ground. Jarvis continued, "Sir, please give the second artificial intelligence derivative system a name to create a brand new data database." Tawny thought for a moment and said firmly, "Then let's call it Ultron. Next, the world of Earth will enter the era of Ultron, and we will have the power to fight against extraterrestrial forces. The future world will usher in change at this moment." In the office on the top floor of the unnatural firm, a glass ripple appeared in the air in the room. Then, Kale and Yutong walked out and returned to the real world from the mirror dimension. Yutong's red lips opened slightly and said softly, "Boss. It seems that the few people you selected are still very talented. As long as they continue to be trained and honed, they will definitely be able to shoulder the heavy responsibility of protecting Earth in the future." It would be great if that was the case. Kale shrugged. Of course, this was what he wanted to see. Only when Earth's forces were strong enough could he leave Earth at will and do what he wanted without any burden. If it weren't for the fact that he had too many concerns in his heart, he probably would have already killed his way to Thanos' base and taken Lorna back. This really isn't like me. Kale shook his head. Of course, he remembered his past debts more clearly than anyone else. Whoever owed him, whoever offended him, he would make them pay back 10-fold or even 100-fold in the future. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was just that the time wasn't right. Yutong Tawny sighed. Kale was just about to say something when he suddenly stopped. His body trembled and a bright light flashed past his eyes. Seeing Kale's abnormality, Yutong stepped forward and gently held his arm. "Boss, what's wrong?" Kale said. The connection that had been broken suddenly reconnected in a short instant just now. Reconnected? What do you mean? Yutong understood almost instantly. Her beautiful eyes lit up. Yes, it's with the doppelganger. Kale's breathing quickened and he clenched his fists. It can't be wrong. In that instant I sensed his existence and he sensed me too. It's just that we're very far apart, even farther than the distance between Earth and the divine territory. It's as if we're separated by a whole world. Where did the other me go? Kale was surprised. The doppelganger and the main body were originally one. Their souls were the same but their bodies were different. Their thoughts were similar but their personalities were different. Kale's main body had experienced the cruel Second World War, the Galactic Arena, the Milky Way Alliance campaign, and the Divine Territory's large-scale war. He had killed gods and slain dragons. It could be said that his existence was the ultimate war machine. Killing was a common occurrence. Therefore he was indifferent, dignified and full of killing intent. He had a sense of oppression that was difficult to hide. As for Superman's doppelganger, because he had experienced too few battles, he was also treated as a young master and a child in the original world. He would be slightly more comfortable, mischievous, sunny, gentle, and more like an ordinary human. Kale narrowed his eyes and said, "No matter where he is, we have to find him and bring him back. The other me might be the key to reversing the future." With Superman's doppelganger Caesar and him in his double star form, who could withstand a double fight? Chapter 518. In the original Kale, even the eyes of the gods' domain's gatekeeper couldn't reach a place far away. This place was separated from the Marvel Universe by dozens of parallel worlds. It also had the Earth in the Milky Way, similar culture and war history, and was also a new world shortly after the end of World War II. 1962 summer. England, near the University of Oxford, in a cheap bar that didn't care about the identity of the guests. After nightfall, the place gradually became lively. The citizens who got off work would come here to drink a few drinks to release the pressure of the day, or look forward to a chance encounter and a night of indulgence. A blonde beauty sat on a high swivel chair in front of the bar. Long wavy blonde hair fell over her shoulders. Her appearance could only be regarded as above average, but her eyes were blue and green. There was a different kind of beauty in this incongruity. Especially. At this time the blonde beauty was looking around. It seemed that in the bar hall she was constantly looking for the person she wanted to find. Her eyes were full of expectation and confusion, which made her a lot of points. Melancholy and confused beauties in bars usually attract heterosexual idiots, heterochromia. When the blonde beauty was still looking for someone, suddenly from behind her, a young man in a suit with wax on his hair suddenly approached her and said, "Your eyes are very rare, very beautiful. It's the beauty of life reflected by the gene mutation." Aimi looked back. She had to admit that the young man who came to hit on her was very young and handsome. He had a kind of weak but steady bookish aura. Between his gestures and words, he was like a famous professor standing in a church and chatting happily. Seeing AI me look over, the young man smiled and introduced himself. "My name is Charles Xavier, you can call me Charles." A few meters away, Raven, who had transformed into a tall girl and looked like an ordinary person, cast a resentful look at Charles. "My name is AI me. I have to say, the way you pick up girls is a bit special." AI me turned her face away with a little disappointment and said coldly, "If it's a normal day, I don't mind you treating me to a drink and chat. But tonight I'm afraid not." "Are you waiting for someone?" Charles seemed to be interested. He wanted to dig a little bit into the secrets hidden in other people's hearts and brains. This was probably a bad habit of his mutation ability. He pressed his left hand against his temple and was about to read AI me's mind when the wooden door of the bar suddenly opened with a creak. Another person entered the bar. Late at night, in a bar in a bustling neighborhood, it was normal for people to come and go. But after the new guest entered the bar, the atmosphere of the entire bar fell silent. It was as if everyone's emotions were attracted by that person. Charles and Ruewen looked in the direction of the door and saw a tall and handsome blonde youth walking into the hall. Yes, tall and handsome. It was often overused in modern times, but the young man in front of him was definitely the representative of this term. The golden-haired youth was nearly 1.78 meters tall. He was tall and slender with broad shoulders. He looked like a sculpture of golden proportions. The long-sleeved casual suit was slightly supported by his muscles, and the exposed skin leaned towards the healthy texture of wheat. He glanced over. The youth's appearance was only above average, but he was very good-looking. The more you looked at him, the better he looked. There was a hidden masculinity in him, and there was something called aura that couldn't be described. As for why he was a youth and not a young man, it was because he looked too young. He was estimated to be around 18 years old. He was a veritable handsome youth. "Newman, give me a glass of brandy." The voice was magnetic and powerful. The golden-haired youth ignored the strange gazes of others and went straight to the side of the bar. He waved at the bartender familiarly. Apparently he was also a regular of this bar. After the golden-haired youth entered the bar, all the women's faces were pink. They ignored their partners and frequently cast flirtatious glances at him. The men clenched their fists and regarded him as the number one male enemy. After waiting for a week, he finally came. Looking at the youth, AI me's beautiful eyes moved. She almost immediately went up to hit on him. "Miss AI me, the person you're waiting for is him, right?" Charles's mouth twitched slightly. "Don't tell me I'm waiting for you." AI me rolled her eyes at him. "I advise you not to provoke him. Otherwise there won't be any bones left." Charles patted his forehead. Ruewen next to him also nodded with deep feeling. AI me turned back and looked at Charles. "You know him?" "It doesn't look like it. How can an old gentleman like you know such a pure sunshine youth?" "What pure sunshine?" Charles was speechless. If the current beauty knew that the first time she hit on a girl in her life was taught and encouraged by the youth, I don't know how she would feel. "Caesar." Charles couldn't help but take the lead to call out the youth's name. "Oh." Caesar heard the voice, picked up the brandy handed to him by the bartender, took a sip and walked towards Charles and the others. He glanced at Charles and Ruewen a few meters away. "Charles, Ruewen. Long time no see." In fact, he already knew that Charles was here, but he didn't want to disturb him from hitting on girls. "Caesar, I haven't seen you for a few years." Ruewen nodded to him. She was not surprised that Caesar recognized her transformation and camouflage at a glance. "Caesar, he can do it." Whether it is me who can transform and camouflage at will or Charles who can read minds, the only one I can't figure out is probably Caesar, who has lived under the same roof for 10 years. I don't know his origin, age, ability, etc. But fortunately, Caesar is not an enemy. On the contrary, Caesar is their teacher and friend. He is more like a child and an ordinary person. He has been living his life as he wants, as if he has no plans or dreams for the future. Give them both a pint of bitter beer and juice. Caesar pointed to the bartender, pointed to Charles and Ruewen, and then put his brandy on the table. "If you don't mind, you can try this glass first." With just a few words, he had taken control of the situation. That maturity that was beyond his age made Charles feel ashamed. It also made the women in the bar unable to sleep at night. "Of course. I don't mind." With her face stained with pink, Aimi sat softly on the chair, holding the glass with both hands. She was already in the stage of falling. "You are hitting on girls in front of me. This is not good. It will damage my reputation as a nightclub professor. Charles looked at Caesar, who stole the limelight, and suggested, "What have you been doing all these years? I haven't seen you for so long. Do you want to come back to my house tonight? Let's get together." "No, I still have an appointment tonight." Caesar smiled, patted Charles on the shoulder, took out $100 bill from his pocket and put it on the table. "Next time. Charles, I'll come to your house next time." He waved his hand and walked to the door. He came quickly and left quickly. "He's still the same." Ruewen covered her mouth and chuckled. "Yeah." Charles looked at Caesar's back as he left, then looked at the $100 bill on the table, shook his head and muttered, "In the words of the East, it's really hard to see the dragon's tail." Before he finished speaking, there was a crash next to him and the glass was broken on the ground. Aimi anxiously followed Caesar's figure and chased out of the bar. But when she opened the wooden door, the streets outside were busy, and there was no trace of Caesar. Next to the bar, on the rooftop of a building up to 30 meters high. "I didn't expect to meet them again. It has been 18 years since I came to this world." Facing the gentle night wind, Caesar was standing on the wall, looking down at the modern streets, and his heart was filled with emotion. That's right. When Caesar shuttled through the quantum field and wanted to return to his original time and space and join his original body, Kale, due to an accident, he came to a new time and space world and has spent 18 years here. Superman's body is constantly repaired and perfected, but he has not found a way to return, and he is wandering in this world. This is the X-Men universe. There is no Captain America, no Stark Industries, no SHLD, no the Avengers, and no Hydra organization. It is a new world where mutants and ordinary people coexist. The next place, I hope I can find a way to return as soon as possible. Caesar looked at the end of the night sky on the left and suddenly ignored gravity and flew up into the air. Under the layers of sonic booms in the air, he shot into the vast night sky like a missile. Chapter 519. Caesar set off from Oxford, England, maintaining a height of 1 kilometer as he flew out of the Atlantic Ocean at top speed. He flew out of the land and into the sea. The Mach speed, which was far beyond modern aircraft, made Caesar seem to be moving against the time difference. The thick darkness in the sky gradually dissipated, and the stars, moon and sun were obviously reversing. From time to time he would shuttle through the clouds, leaving a long white trail in the sky. From time to time he would fall down like a meteorite, skimming over the surface of the sea, raising a straight line of huge waves behind him, frightening countless seagulls and fish. In less than half a minute, the outline of a new continent appeared in front of Caesar's eyes. It was America on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, where the United States was located. The time difference between England and the United States was a full 5 hours, so it was already late at night in England, but night had just fallen in the United States. The bright and swaying city lights dotted the land. Crossing the inland desert, Caesar arrived at Las Vegas, where he had an appointment tonight. Similar to the world of Marvel, Las Vegas was also the largest city in the United States, and also a city with a high international reputation. It was world famous for tourism, shopping, and vacations centered around gambling. More than 10 years after the end of World War II, the world's overall economy recovered, and the city was much more prosperous. There's still plenty of time. Caesar looked at the sky and landed on the rooftop of a building in the city block. He slightly tidied up his hair that was messed up by the wind. 1 minute to cross the Atlantic Ocean, 6,000 kilometers, to attend another banquet. Probably no one would believe it if he told them. Caesar thought about it and entered a local high-end clothing store to try on and buy a suit for the banquet. It had to be said that clothes make the man. This sentence was applicable in any situation. After Caesar changed from casual clothes to a fitting suit, his outstanding temperament was even more difficult to hide. The female employees and customers in the store couldn't take their eyes off him. After taking a small note with the phone number of the female employee, he went to the high-end banquet in the bustling city block. Hellfire Club. The power of the boss behind it was unknown. It only received the upper class, and there were many internal security personnel. The guests who were qualified to come here were either rich or respectable. The entrance of the Hellfire Club was luxurious and majestic. Caesar had just stepped forward when 2 security men in black suits and sunglasses subconsciously reached out to stop him. "Excuse me, please show your identity or the club's invitation." "The invitation, I remember it's in," Caesar muttered. He reached into his suit, took out a golden invitation and handed it to one of the security guards. The security guard took the invitation and opened it to read. His originally serious face suddenly became extremely surprised. Another security guard leaned over and saw the identity note on the invitation. He was also stunned and rubbed his eyes, suspecting that he had seen wrongly. What? Is there a problem? Caesar looked at them calmly. No problem at all. The security guard came back to his senses, folded the invitation in his hand, and respectfully handed it back to Caesar. He said respectfully, "Your Excellency the Duke from the United Kingdom, welcome to the banquet. Please come inside." Duke of England? The faces of the other ladies and gentlemen who were dressed in gorgeous attire at the door changed instantly when they heard this address. What kind of concept was a duke? In the aristocratic royal families of Europe, it could be said that their status was second only to the king, and they were considered the princes of the eastern countries. Especially after World War II, the United Kingdom no longer conferred nobility. The title could only be passed down by the original one. As time passed, it would become fewer and fewer until it completely disappeared. What rich and famous people in the new era. The real dukes and aristocrats completely looked down on them. After all, the land they ruled in their backyard was the size of a city. They were really rich and had a deep heritage. It was rare for a duke to appear in such a place, not to mention such a young duke. Thank you. Caesar nodded, picked up the invitation and smoothly walked into the club. Since he came to this time and space and couldn't go back for the time being, he had to find something to do. The most important thing was that he needed a new identity. More than 10 years ago, before the end of World War II, Caesar rescued the high-ranking British royal family in a war turmoil. Coupled with some reasons, he cleverly got the identity of a duke. It just so happened that the United Kingdom stopped conferring nobility that year, and he was the last and the youngest duke in the United Kingdom. With the identity of a duke in the United Kingdom, Caesar didn't need to disguise his identity anymore. He could use it to go to any upper-class banquets and activities in any country. There was only one purpose for this: to collect enough information about the world he was in and find a reliable way to return to the original time and space. Inside the Hellfire Club, the interior decoration was more luxurious and high-end than the exterior. The neon lights on the ceiling swayed and shone, and music flowed in every corner. Security guards could be seen standing against the walls of the hall. Beautiful and sexy women were basically wearing bikinis, revealing a large part of their skin. They were escorting guests who were either bald or big-bellied as they walked into the private rooms. When Caesar walked into the hall of the club, almost all the ladies without appointments looked at him in unison. Their eyes were green as if they were hunters who had found their prey. "He's mine. Don't fight with me for him." The three girls, who thought they were pretty and slim, took the lead and walked towards Caesar from different directions, tiptoeing like cats. "Mr." Some of the ladies quickened their pace and wanted to talk, but Caesar shook his index finger and stopped them from approaching. Caesar stretched out his hand to the left and took a glass of wine from the passing bartender's plate. He sat in the corner of the public sofa in the hall. He didn't want to talk to the ladies or make an appointment. This made many of the ladies leave with a regretful expression. "The quality is not bad," Caesar commented softly and tasted the wine. No one knew if he was talking about the wine or the ladies. It wasn't that he didn't want to get close to women, but under his superhuman sense of smell, he could tell the cleanliness of the ladies with just a sniff. What's more, he often went to such places and didn't lack beautiful encounters. What he lacked was only useful information. Shaking the sweet wine in the glass, Caesar gently closed his eyes and released the restrictions on his ears. Hundreds of thousands of voices poured into his ears without missing anything. Under his superhuman brain, he calculated and selected useful information. "Come give me a kiss, chick. Colonel Hendry, why is he here?" Recently, the United States plans to deploy missiles in Turkey, which may become the fuse of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. "I lost another 1 million today. Is the Third World War about to start again?" Bars, banquets, and event venues gathered people from all walks of life. If he could collect all the information they shared every day, he could easily crush the intelligence department of a big country. Sure enough, no world can avoid the occurrence of war, even if there is no Hydra organization here, Caesar muttered to himself. In this time and space, because there was no symbol of peace in Captain America, there were no superheroes as the benchmark of the era. Since the end of World War II, there were more Cold Wars and secret disputes between big countries than in the world of Marvel. However, as a person from another time and space, Caesar didn't want to intervene in the war. In the world of Marvel, his original body as a symbol of peace was tired enough. His avatar didn't want to repeat the same mistakes. Chapter 520. Caesar sat on the sofa in the club hall, savoring the fine wine while collecting all kinds of information. After a while, he saw Colonel Hendley, who was holding a girl in each hand, walking toward one of the private rooms with curtains under the lead of a woman who was wearing a plush cloak. She was wearing revealing clothes for such an entertainment occasion, but she still had the aura of an empress. In the club hall, all the security guards subconsciously stepped aside, not daring to block the woman's steps. The regulars who came often didn't come forward to talk to her. Although they looked at the woman with obscene and conquering eyes, there was more fear that was difficult to hide. If one had a deep understanding of the Hellfire Club, they would know that the woman was the legendary behind-the-scenes boss. The Hellfire Club was loved by the upper class and was popular in both the underworld and the underworld. It wasn't an ordinary nightclub. As the behind-the-scenes boss of the club, the woman was naturally not an ordinary high-class girl. When the curtain of the private room was put down, White Empress's beautiful eyes swept across the lively hall, and her eyes paused on Caesar. She frowned slightly, feeling that she had seen him somewhere before, but she quickly put down the curtain without leaving a trace. It's getting more and more interesting. Caesar lowered his eyes, leaned back comfortably on the sofa, raised his neck, and finished the fine wine in the glass in one gulp. He snapped his fingers at the passing bartender. "Another glass of brandy." "Yes, sir." The bartender took the glass respectfully. At this moment, another young and sexy girl walked in from the entrance of the club hall. The girl had long dark blonde hair that reached her waist. Her appearance was considered top-notch in this place where beauties gathered. She had a good figure and a healthy tan which made people's eyes light up. She was also wearing a sexy black bikini, but she was a little embarrassed. Her hands were slightly nervously placed on her lower abdomen, and her bare feet were slightly tiptoeing on the red carpet. Several middle-aged gentlemen who were still in the hall had a slight change in expression. They rubbed their palms and quickly surrounded the girl like wolves who smelled blood. In the Hellfire Club, the guests had the right to choose the girl, but the girl didn't have the right to choose. Whoever made the reservation first would be the one. When the girl saw several people approaching her, she couldn't help but shrink back. Just as she was about to find a reason to refuse, she didn't expect that someone would suddenly step forward and reach out to hold her small waist without any excess fat. With a cry of surprise, she directly took it into her arms like it was her possession. "I'm sorry, I've already made a reservation." Caesar held the new wine glass and hugged the girl with a smile. The woman was stunned. Her mind went blank and she forgot to resist for a moment. The other middle-aged gentlemen who were a step too late looked at the youth who had the intention to snatch it away. Their originally refined and gentlemanly faces immediately froze. The corners of Caesar's mouth curled up as he walked towards the sofa with the girl in his arms, leaving behind the middle-aged gentlemen with ashen faces. Little brat. As a senior diplomat of Italy, Griff had never suffered such humiliation. He was about to confront Caesar, but he was stopped by two old friends. "Forget it, Griff, it's not good to cause trouble here." "That's right. Give some face to the Hellfire Club. When we get out of here we'll slowly settle the score." Hearing his friend's advice, Griff glared, blew his beard, and angrily looked at Caesar's back as he walked away. Well, he's lucky. Bringing the girl to a corner, Caesar first sat down on the sofa, then pulled the girl into his arms and handed the shaking wine glass to her lips. "Come drink with me." The girl was still in a half-dazed state. She cleverly opened her lips and took a sip of wine. 2 clusters of red floated on her white cheeks. Caesar maintained his smile and continued to shake the wine glass. Looking at the lip marks left on the edge of the glass, he also took a sip of wine and commented, "Not bad." The girl finally reacted. She was molested by a boy 5 years younger than her. She subconsciously wanted to break free from Caesar's arms, but Caesar held her body tighter and whispered in her ear, "You are not a girl, right?" The girl's heart was in turmoil. She no longer resisted and pretended to be confused and whispered, "What are you talking about?" Caesar smiled and held her slender hand. He leaned close to her earlobe and replied, "There is a hard skin on your right index finger. Although it's not obvious, it's obvious when I touch it. It's very inconsistent with the rest of the smooth parts. This is because you've been using guns for a long time." "I practice self-defense. Can't I?" The girl was still stubborn. Caesar blinked and said, "Yes. But as a girl your body is too clean. If you're inexperienced I can teach you at night." "You little bastard." She was obviously much older, but she had been molested several times. The girl was defeated again. The boy in front of her was definitely a wily old fox. Even so, she didn't show any panic. Since the boy knew that she was not a girl and still helped her out, it meant that he didn't mean any harm. My name is Caesar. What about you, sister? Caesar hugged the girl and continued to taste the wine. More. According to our age, you should call me sister. Mora raised her head discontentedly and glanced at Caesar unhappily. But at such a close distance, she finally saw his face clearly. In addition, their noses were almost touching, which made her bounce away as if she had been electrocuted. Before she bounced a few centimeters away, Caesar pulled her into his arms again. Be careful. The security here is watching. Damn it. I'll bear with you. Mora gritted her teeth. If the CIA training center knew that the female devil who had beaten down countless male agents was lying in the boy's arms like a docile cat, it would cause a sensation. Good girl. That's right. Caesar smiled faintly. Now that we know each other, can you tell me where you came from and your purpose? Of course not. Mora refused decisively and then hesitated. Unless you help me distract the security in the hall. Forget it. You can't do that anyway. Then it's a deal. Caesar suddenly let go of Mora and stood up from the sofa, which made Mora feel inexplicably disappointed. In a trance, she saw Caesar walking directly to Griff and the other two who were still in the hall. What does he want to do? Mora was stunned. Griff and the other two were drinking and chatting, looking for a new girl when Caesar walked up to them. Griff saw that it was Caesar, and before he could react, his face was suddenly slapped hard. Slap. The extremely loud slap sounded in the hall of the Hellfire Club, making the guests cover their mouths in horror and attracting the attention of the security on duty. What are you doing? Griff held his injured left cheek and looked at Caesar in exasperation. His red face quickly swelled up. Nothing. I remember that you glanced at me just now. I was very upset, so I slapped you to vent my anger. Caesar said matter-of-factly and took out a white handkerchief to wipe the palm of his hand. Griff's eyes were burning. He said angrily, Are you deliberately humiliating me? Do you know who I am? No, I'm not targeting you alone. Caesar threw away the handkerchief and said lightly, I'm saying that you and the two behind you are garbage. You've dirted my eyes. Please get out of my sight right now. As soon as this extremely arrogant sentence came out, the whole hall of the Hellfire Club was in an uproar. Chapter 521. The social way of upper-class people and celebrities was often one thing on the surface and another in the dark. On the surface they called you brother and were polite and modest, but behind their backs they were always scheming against each other. For example, on a dating platform like the Hellfire Club, the guests would show some mercy to each other and would not offend each other. And today happened to be an exception. There was no other reason, just because he didn't like you, so he slapped you in the face in front of everyone. Caesar still maintained a gentle smile. If Griff's face was not red and swollen, the guests next to him would have thought that everything was purely an accident. His casual but arrogant words made the guests gasp. Even Mora, who was in the corner of the hall, was stunned. This is an opportunity. Mora saw a group of security guards surrounding Caesar and suddenly came to her senses. She quickly got up from the sofa and went to Colonel Henley's private room. At this time, the focus of the people in the hall fell on Caesar. Naturally, no one noticed Mora's action. What? Caesar glanced at Mora's back like an unforgiving playboy. Without waiting for Griff, who was flushed with anger, to speak, he continued to ask, I said you're trash, are you not convinced? Little bastard, I'm going to kill you, I'm definitely going to kill you. Griff couldn't stand it anymore. His hair and beard exploded in anger, and he pounced on Caesar, who was standing in front of him. Caesar neither dodged nor defended, as if he was looking at a clown. When Griff was 1 centimeter away from him, several tall and powerful security guards suddenly rushed out and held Griff's limbs, not allowing him to move again. What are you doing? You got the wrong person. It's him who is making trouble. Do you know who I am? Griff's eyes were bloodshot. He struggled desperately and screamed at the top of his lungs, but he couldn't get rid of the security guard's shackles with his own strength. The security guards wearing sunglasses were indifferent and pressed Griff to the ground. I'll leave him to you. I don't want to see him again tonight. Caesar didn't pay attention to him and turned sideways to the main supervisor, who hurried over. The pot-bellied supervisor wiped off his cold sweat and hurriedly nodded, Yes, Your Excellency. I'm really sorry, but everything is on the house tonight. I hope you can have a good time. Caesar nodded slightly and walked towards the sofa in the hall. The onlookers consciously made way for him. I'm sorry, Mr. Griff. It's not that the club doesn't want to give you face, But who told you to offend someone you shouldn't have? The supervisor looked at Griff and shook his head regretfully. He ordered the 2 security guards, send him out of Las Vegas. Griff had already given up on resisting, muttering to himself, his face pale and bloodless. In this kind of club, the security guards were not the police. They would not care who was right and who was wrong. Whoever had a higher status would be the right side. How could a mere Italian ambassador be compared with the Duke of a large country? Caesar returned to his original position on the sofa, but Mora, who disguised as a girl, had disappeared. Did you sneak in? Caesar smiled faintly, sitting on the sofa, picked up the wine glass and continued to taste the wine. But his eyes narrowed slightly, looking at Colonel Henley's private room. His blue eyes glowed, and the curtain that originally blocked his vision was penetrated by his superhuman eyesight. Everything inside was suddenly visible. Caesar, clearly, saw that the private room was empty. He focused his vision and saw the things behind the inner wall of the private room with his X-ray vision. There was a very hidden dark room in the private room. Behind the wall was a study room. There were various world maps and intelligence files on the desk in the study room. Mora, who had sneaked in, was squatting beside the desk, twisting her hips and skillfully flipping through the cabinets to look for intelligence files. This technique, is it from the CIA? Caesar shook his head and thought. At this moment, Mora, who was in the dark room, seemed to have heard a strange sound and couldn't help but look at a dark room deeper in the study room. Caesar's expression changed and also looked over. Although the deepest room was a dark room, it was spacious and luxuriously decorated. There were comfortable conference tables and chairs inside. In the second dark room, White Empress sat together with a middle-aged man, and a non-mainstream young man dressed in a suit was sitting on a high chair and drinking alone. Colonel Henley, who was the guest, was sitting on the other side of the 3 people with his legs crossed. The middle-aged man and Colonel Henley seemed to be talking about something. The negotiation failed and both of them looked unhappy. Caesar released part of the restriction of his superhuman hearing, and the conversation that was separated by several walls immediately entered his ears. Colonel Henley stared at the middle-aged man and sneered, "Mr. Shang? You want me to change my mind and agree to deploy missiles in Turkey? That's basically impossible. You and I should both know that once missiles are deployed in Turkey, the Soviet Union will definitely take action. If it triggers a war between the 2 countries, it's not something that you and I can take responsibility for. Colonel, don't jump to conclusions too early." Shang's face turned slightly cold. "Then there's nothing to talk about." Colonel Henley frowned and vigilantly touched the pistol at his waist. "Let's change the way of negotiation." Shang clapped his hands. The non-mainstream young man heard the reminder and immediately stood up. He stretched out his left hand and a whirlwind appeared on his palm. As the whirlwind spun, it kept getting bigger and bigger, evolving into a small tornado. "What did you put in my wine?" Colonel Henley stood up in horror. He mistakenly thought that the other party had put something in his wine, causing him to have a strange hallucination. The non-mainstream young man pushed his palm forward, and the whirlwind floated forward, sucking Colonel Henley into it. He was thrown up 3 or 4 meters high and then he fell heavily on the sofa. Colonel Henley struggled to get up, took out his pistol and shot at Shang. White Empress stood up directly in front of Shang, and her body turned into a sparkling diamond at the same time. Da, 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 da. The bullets landed on White Empress's diamond body, but it only caused some sparks. It didn't cause any damage. Colonel Henley opened his mouth in despair, and the pistol fell from his hand. It was obvious that he had given up resisting. Very powerful, isn't it? A superpower derived from a gene mutant. Shang looked at him with a smile. In the face of absolute strength, all power and wealth were illusory. Colonel Henley was silent and leaned on the sofa in surrender. He knew that he couldn't resist the mutant among humans. "Where is Demon Azazo?" Shang asked. White Empress tilted her head and blew a sharp and loud whistle. Under the glow of a red flame in the dark room, a young man who looked like a demon with red skin inexplicably appeared in the air and reached out his left hand to Colonel Henley. Colonel Henley hesitated for a moment, but still held his hand. The red flame reignited, and the 2 disappeared from the dark room at the same time. In just a short while, the 3 mutants all showed their unique talents. This scene was not only seen by Mora from the CIA, but also by Caesar, who was in the club hall. For mutants, Caesar whispered to himself. He was getting more and more excited. In the Marvel universe, humans with unique abilities were rare. They were either villains or superheroes. In the current X-Men universe, Due to the prominent mutant genes, mutants continued to appear in the human population, and the number was as many as tens of thousands. Most of these mutants were hidden among ordinary people, such as Charles and Rue when at the moment. The X-Men universe was a universe where real talents were born, and there were as many superhumans as dogs. Chapter 522. Mora slipped out of the dark room in a state of shock. What she saw tonight was beyond her imagination. The superpower that was spread around the world like magic really existed, and some people began to use it to intervene in the politics of major countries. Colonel Henley is already under someone else's control. If he changes his mind, then the Turkish frontline will most likely deploy missiles. As an excellent CIA agent, Mora naturally understood the pros and cons. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself down. Coming out of the private room, Mora subconsciously looked at the corner of the hall. The young man named Caesar who was sitting on the sofa just now was long gone. He was nowhere to be seen in the swaying neon lights in the hall. Mora's eyes dimmed, but she quickly pulled herself together and walked to the entrance of the Hellfire Club. On the road next to the Hellfire Club, a small black car was parked. After Mora walked to the car, the window rolled down. A slightly bald middle-aged man was sitting in the driver's seat. "How is it? Nothing happened inside, right? I told you a club of this level wouldn't be so easily caught." Before the middle-aged man finished speaking, Mora opened the back door and sat inside. She interrupted him and said, "Bob, quickly connect me to the highest officer in the CIA." Bob's eyes widened in shock and he screamed, "Are you crazy? The highest officer should be discussing matters at the Turkish frontline base now." "Cut the crap, I have something very important to report." Mora's eyes and tone were firm. Bob hesitated and reached out to the hidden communication device in the car. He sighed helplessly and said, "Forget it, let's wait and write the report together." After connecting with the highest officer in the CIA, Mora gave a simple report of what she saw in the Hellfire Club, including the strange abilities revealed by the mutated humans and the threat to Colonel Henley. In the end, she anxiously concluded, there must be something wrong with the Hellfire Club, or it may directly affect the deployment of missiles in Turkey. "What are you talking about, Agent Mora?" In the central control room of the U.S. military base in Turkey, the highest-ranking officer of the CIA was sitting on a chair. He looked at Colonel Henley, who was talking casually, and said into the phone in a low voice, "Colonel Henley is sitting not far from me. You saw him in the Hellfire Club? Unless he traveled nearly 3,000 kilometers in 10 minutes. Emola frowned slightly, and the image of the devil-like man appeared in his mind. "Don't waste my time," the highest-ranking officer said impatiently and hung up the satellite phone. Hearing the busy tone on the other side of the phone, Mora could only put down the phone and raise his neck to lean against the soft back seat. As a veteran of the CIA, Bob had already expected this. He said, "Like I said, without sufficient evidence, intelligence is sometimes useless, especially when it involves supernatural phenomena such as mutants and such." "I'm not that easily discouraged," Mora said stubbornly. She suddenly thought of something and asked, "Bob, do you know a boy named Caesar? Just now when I was in the club, he even helped me out. Could it be that you secretly sent someone?" "How is that possible? There are only two of us here tonight." Bob shook his head decisively. Suddenly, he was stunned and looked at Mora in surprise. "You said his name is Caesar?" "Yes, he looks very young, about 17 or 18 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, outstanding temperament, about 1.8 meters tall and a strong and fit body." Speaking of this, Mora remembered the intimate contact just now and blushed unnaturally. Fortunately, the light in the car was dim, so Bob didn't notice it. Bob's face became serious and he said solemnly, "Hearing what you said, it should be him." "You know him?" Mora asked in surprise. "Of course not, I just heard of him." Bob was silent for a moment and organized his words. "Caesar. The last Duke of the United Kingdom and also the youngest one. His birth and parents are unknown. In the CIA's archives, he can even be ranked in the top 3 for the lack of information." "Duke? That little man is a duke?" Mora covered her mouth with both hands. Although she knew that Caesar's identity was not ordinary, she was still shocked to know his true identity. "Yes. Speaking of the origin of his Duke identity, it's also a mystery." Bob smiled bitterly. According to the archives, Caesar was recorded more than 10 years ago, before the end of World War II, and the flames of war in some areas were still burning. He saved an important member of the United Kingdom's royal family and was conferred the title of Duke. He paused and continued, But think about it, more than 10 years ago. How old is Caesar? How could he save the royal family of a big country? Then it can only be fake? He was conferred the title because of other reasons, Mora said. You're not the only one who thinks so. Many people think so too. There are also rumors that Caesar is the illegitimate son of the Queen of England. Bob spread his hands and said, but no matter what, he was still conferred the title of Duke. Think about it, a child of a few years old, carrying more power and wealth than a family, what would happen? This was self-evident. After being conferred the title, not only were some outsiders envious of Caesar, even the members of the royal family would attack Caesar in various ways. But why now? Mora's eyes widened. Under such circumstances, Caesar was still growing up healthily. Bob smiled bitterly. That's why it's all a mystery. I only know that those who attacked Caesar, whether openly or secretly, all died mysteriously, without exception. To this day he's still active in the upper-class social banquets of big countries. He won't even give face to the big bosses of big countries, and no one dares to compete with him. He seems to be a playboy, but in fact he's relying on himself. What kind of person is he? Emodu's beautiful eyes shone with a strange light. Bob solemnly reminded her, I advise you, it's best not to be curious about him. Although the CIA collects intelligence, there are some people and some things that we can't touch. If you fall into it, you won't be able to pull yourself out. I know. Although Emodu said so, she secretly planted a seed in her heart. Sir, I don't believe you. Then what do you want to do next? Bob asked. Emodu said, I want to find a doctor who studies mutant genes. He might have a way. At this moment. At the US base about 3,000 kilometers away from the Hellfire Club. Because Colonel Henley changed his mind and agreed to deploy missiles in Turkey, the US generals in the control room were arguing. No one noticed that directly above the US base, about 1,000 meters in the air, Caesar, in a suit, faced the high wind and floated in the air, ignoring gravity. He looked down at the base fortress that was dotted with lights. His deep blue eyes seemed to penetrate the steel plate and see everything in the control room. Chapter 523. On the roof of the UA base fortress. Under the cover of the thick night, the man who was in the same group as the Hellfire Club, known as Demon Azazo, was standing in a blind spot and was not detected by the surrounding monitors. Azazo was wearing a black gentleman's suit, and his red skin turned dark red under the night. He was like a bat beast, quietly leaning against the window, maintaining a squatting position, and peeking at the military meeting unfolding in the central control room. Colonel Hendry. Once the missiles are deployed in Turkey, we can launch missiles at the Soviet Union that they can't intercept at any time. This obvious signal will stimulate the Soviet Union. Do you still insist on the decision? The CIA's highest officer looked at Colonel Hendry and asked in a deep voice. Yes. Colonel Hendry's face was calm as he said with certainty, I still think it is better to deploy missiles in Turkey and take the initiative. This is not a random thought, but a decision I made after careful consideration. The CIA's highest officer frowned. It should be known that Colonel Hendry was resolutely against it before, but for some reason, he suddenly changed his mind 180 degrees. He then remembered the information that Agent Mora had just reported, about the Hellfire Club being strange and the possibility of Colonel Hendry being bribed. After Azazo confirmed that Colonel Hendry was on their side, he took out the satellite communicator in his suit pocket, dialed it and calmly and concisely reported, It's done. Shang's slow voice came from the communicator. Very good, watch him. When he goes to a place where there is no one, tell him to meet again the day after tomorrow. He will get what he wants. Okay. Tonight Azazo nodded and replied, but suddenly, his words stopped abruptly as if he saw something unbelievable. His beast-like red-brown pupils kept shrinking. What's wrong? Azazo, what happened? Shang could hear the abnormality in his voice and could not help but ask in surprise. That's all for now, I will report to you when I get back. Azazo decisively hung up the communicator and put it back into his pocket. Only then did he coldly look to the side. He did not know when, but a blond boy was also standing on the roof of the fortress, quietly watching him from less than 5 meters away. Have you finally noticed me? Caesar revealed a bright smile and smiled at him. Azo's muscles tensed up. Even with his beast-like senses, he didn't notice when the other party had approached him. Are you also a mutant? Azazo asked tentatively. This was the only explanation. Only a mutant could do this. Mutants? Let's not count them for now. Caesar blinked. He was a Kryptonian and could not be considered a pure human being. Naturally, he was not a genetically mutated mutant. However, this was not the main point. Caesar stared at Azo and threw out a bunch of questions with great interest. What you used just now was a teleportation talent, right? Teleportation? Or a fixed-point teleportation? Are there any restrictions on time and distance? You saw it. Azo's expression changed drastically. He did not expect that his biggest secret, a crucial part of the Hellfire Club's plan, would be seen and exposed by a big boy on the spot. Complicated thoughts raced in his mind. Azo looked at Caesar with a cold gaze, and a murderous intent rose in his heart. Caesar shrugged as if he could read his mind. You want to kill me? I advise you not to do that. Azo did not speak. He looked at Caesar, who was 5 meters away, and reached for the dagger hidden at his waist. At such a close distance, with his teleportation ability, he could appear behind the boy almost instantly and kill him silently. But just as he put his hand on the dagger and prepared to assassinate, in the face of Caesar, who was in a defenseless posture, Azo felt as if he had fallen into an icehouse. A chill surged from his tailbone to his spine, and his body and mind froze at the same time. He would die. Azo's forehead was dripping with cold sweat. He was called Devil and Red Devil, not only because of his red skin, but also because of his sharp senses, which were comparable to a beast's, which had saved his life many times. But just now, the moment before Azo was about to attack Caesar, he clearly smelled the scent of death. He would die. If he attacked the boy in front of him, he would definitely die. He had not attacked yet, but the fear had already been engraved in his bones. This was the mutated gene in his body, and it was frantically ringing the alarm bell, telling him to immediately stay away from the boy in front of him. Azo's body trembled, and then with the emergence of the red flame, he escaped into the void and disappeared from the top of the US base fortress. You're smart. It's rare to encounter a mutated ability that interests me. Don't let me down. Looking at the red shadow disappearing in front of him, Caesar smiled instead, and then looked at the distant forest on the left side of the base. 10 kilometers away from the Turkish US base fortress, in an uninhabited forest. With a whoosh, a ball of crimson flame appeared in the air. Azo arrived in the forest. His left hand was supporting himself against a pine tree while his right hand was wiping the sweat on his forehead. He muttered to himself, "Who is that person? Are you talking about me? My name is Caesar." Without any warning, a loud voice rang out from behind. Azo's hair stood on end and he looked back. Caesar was standing 5 meters behind him, looking at him with boredom. "Are you a human or a ghost?" Azo took a deep breath, his back pressed against the pine tree. "Of course I'm a human." Caesar shook his head, looked at him and analyzed, "In the blink of an eye, you came here 10 kilometers away. It seems that you don't need to teleport to a specific location. Is it a higher-level teleportation talent?" Azo gritted his teeth, turned into a red flame again, and disappeared into the forest in an instant. "You're really tenacious." Caesar shook his head helplessly and stepped hard. A white wave of air burst out, and under the falling leaves, he instantly broke through the sound barrier and soared into the sky. This time it was no longer a kilometer in the sky, but with the clouds as the base, Caesar broke through the atmosphere and came to near outer space where he could see the round outline of the Earth, bathing under the direct sunlight. Caesar looked down at the blue planet below, closed his eyes, and released the maximum limit of his superhuman hearing. Complex and tedious sounds immediately rushed into his ears, and his brain processed them at a speed far faster than the calculation speed of a supercomputer. Did he escape to America? He really looks like a rat. Caesar quickly opened his eyes and looked to the north. His body swooped down, and he became a meteor that cut through the night sky. America, Las Vegas. In almost an instant he crossed 3,000 kilometers. Blazing with red flames, Azo appeared from the void and fell on the desert in the suburbs. Huff. Struggling to get up from the sand, Azo panted heavily. Continuous long-distance teleportation consumed a lot of his physical strength. But fortunately, as long as he got rid of that strange person called Caesar, it would be a blessing. Azo's mouth was dry, and he saw that there was a stoat's shop dozens of meters in front of him. He didn't care about his strange appearance and walked toward the stoat's shop. As he approached the stoat's shop by the desert road, a gust of wind blew up. Azo was in a daze and he saw someone on a chair at the door waving at him. An illusion? Azazo was stunned. Caesar sat on a chair outside Stos, drinking beer with his head tilted back. He shook the unopened bottle of beer in front of him. You must be thirsty. Do you want to stop and have a cold beer? Chapter 524. Hellfire Club, Underground Secret Room. Just 3 minutes ago we lost contact with Azatso. Shang sat on the sofa with his legs crossed. His hands were clenched so tightly that they made cracking sounds. His face was so cold that frost was about to condense on it. His words caused the hall to fall into a brief silence. The non-mainstream youth who had the ability to rapidly rotate his body had a face full of surprise. How is this possible? Even the White Queen frowned and pondered. Maybe something has happened, right? Or is it a satellite signal problem? With Demon Azatso's instant teleportation ability, even if he encounters something he can't handle, no one can stop him as long as he wants to run. It's because of this that I'm worried. Shang loosened his clenched fists and said coldly, Geno's Emma, we have to speed up our original plan. If we continue to delay, there might be other changes. Okay. Understood. The non-mainstream youth and White Empress nodded. Their faces were a little more dignified and excited. If the expected plan succeeded, the Third World War that would engulf countries all over the world was about to begin. On the other side, 30 kilometers away from the Hellfire Club, in front of the straw shop on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Gesturing to the iced beer in his hand, Caesar looked at Azatso with a smile. But at this time, in Azatso's eyes, the smile of the young man in front of him was comparable to the evil grin of a demon. You are a monster? Azatso held it in for a long time. His face that was already red looked even darker and uglier. In the past, others called him a monster and a demon. This was the first time he had described someone in this way. One could imagine how much shock Caesar had brought to him tonight. I've already said my name is Caesar. Caesar stood up from the wooden chair and walked a few steps closer. He stared at Azatso and looked him up and down. He shook his head with slight regret. 2 rounds of 3,000 kilometers and you're already a little exhausted? It's too short. It seems that what you have mastered can only be considered as a long-distance teleportation ability. To be considered as a super long-distance teleportation ability, it would at least involve other planets and enough to cross the starry sky. For example, Marvel's Rainbow Bridge, Teleportation Gate, and the Dimensional Stone. Short? Azo felt like he was being looked down upon, but he didn't know how to refute. After all, Caesar had returned to America earlier than him, yet he didn't even pant. So you still have a tail. Caesar glanced sideways at Azo's back. There was a red tail that looked like a demon from hell. It swayed left and right like a cat, and the tip of the tail was like a sharp bayonet. Don't force me. As Azo spoke, he took out a pair of daggers, one in each hand. I won't kill you. You can come and try. Caesar shrugged. He raised his left hand and extended an index finger, as if he wanted to use it as a weapon. Stop joking. Azo let out a furious roar. He was a red devil, a demon among demons. He was between a human and a beast, but he was a higher mutated life form. He was usually the nightmare of his enemies, the king of assassins, but now he was forced into a desperate situation. Azo no longer cared about fear. He turned into a red flame and disappeared. The next moment he appeared behind Caesar. He was in the air, and the daggers in his hands and the spike in his tail were aimed at the back of Caesar's head, neck, and heart. Caesar didn't move half a step. At the critical moment, his index finger stretched out like lightning and flicked 3 times. Then, the daggers in Azo's hands and the spike in his tail were all bounced back. How is this possible? Great pain came from his perlicue tail, but the shock in Azo's heart was 10 times greater. There was no time to think. Azo's body frequently turned into red flames, and he constantly teleported short distances. He switched back and forth between Caesar's side, and the daggers in his hands and tail in his hands continued to launch a fierce attack. There was a series of clanking sounds as sparks flew. Within 5 seconds, Azo had teleported over a dozen times, launching a barrage of attacks at Caesar's body. But no matter what angle he attacked from, be it with his twin blades or his tail, Caesar was always able to react in time and block all the attacks with a wave of his index finger. Cold sweat had already soaked his collar. The more Azo tried to attack, the greater his fear of Caesar's strength. The other party didn't predict the next teleportation location in advance. Instead, he made a timely response in the extremely short interval between the teleportation and the attack. He used the index finger of his left hand all the time. He didn't use his right hand, nor did he move half a step. What kind of astonishing superhuman reaction was this? Azo didn't know that to Caesar, as long as he opened up his senses, the flow of time was different from ordinary humans. Humans often described the short period of time when they couldn't react as instant or moment, but Caesar could use this moment as 10 seconds or a minute. Ha! Azo teleported in front of Caesar one last time and stabbed his daggers at Caesar's eyeballs. This time, Caesar didn't know if it was because his reaction was too slow or because of some other reason, but he could only watch as the daggers closed in. Was I careless? Azo was so excited that his entire body was trembling. But before he could smile, the daggers that stabbed Caesar's eyes seemed to have stabbed into hard, refined steel. The daggers, which couldn't bear the weight, immediately broke. Azo's smile completely froze and disappeared. As if he had lost all his strength, he knelt in front of Caesar and looked at the shattered daggers on the ground. It turned out that the other party didn't need to defend or dodge from the beginning. Even the eyes, which were the weakest part of the human body, were as hard as steel marbles. Unimaginable movement speed, reaction speed, extraordinary strength, and a body of steel. Azo's mind went blank. He finally understood why he had the feeling that he would die in the beginning: the difference in strength. The difference in strength was like a natural chasm. The strength of the two of them was on a completely different dimension. Mutated human broke the 10,000-year shackles of human genes and took the first step of rapid evolution. Then Caesar was already standing at the peak of the evolution pyramid. A truly perfect evolved human? Superman? Only Superman can describe it, right? Azo looked up at Caesar, completely in awe and submission. Why not fighting anymore? Caesar looked at him in surprise and urged, "Continue, you can try teleportation again. At most, I won't fight back this time." Azo lowered his head and said, "I lost, master." Master? What is that? Caesar was a little confused. He was only interested in the teleportation talent and wanted to find a way to return to the original Marvel world. So he kept chasing Azo for experiments. Azo said matter-of-factly, "You are the strongest person I have ever seen. Naturally, you are my master. I don't need subordinates. Too troublesome, too troublesome." Caesar decisively refused. After thinking for a while, he suddenly took off at the speed of sound and disappeared into the desert night sky like a meteor. Looking at the disappearing star, Azo was also stunned. He took the initiative to seek refuge, but was rejected without hesitation. Chapter 525. At noon the next day. Oxford University, England. After the professor's lecture on genetics, Charles, who was wearing a suit, and Ruey, who had transformed into an ordinary woman, walked out of the school gate side by side. In the eyes of third-party students, they would be an enviable couple. After all, the man was young and handsome, and the woman was tall and beautiful, and they lived in the same house as childhood sweethearts for more than 10 years. Ruey secretly looked at Charles, who was walking with her, and sighed in her heart. Unfortunately, she was a different kind of mutant. If she didn't transform and disguise herself, her ugly appearance would probably be treated as a monster. It was also for this reason that Charles, who usually indulged in wine and women, couldn't have sexual interest in her. "Do you want a drink? There's a drinking contest in the bar today," Charles said to Ruey, who was absent-minded. "Okay." Ruey nodded obediently. No matter where it was, as long as Charles was there, she would go. Might be good to go on like this. In a bar near Oxford University in the hall. Drink, drink, drink. Dozens of guests gathered in a group and cheered. Charles had taken off his coat, held a long glass with both hands and gulped down the beer. Some beer was spilled directly on his white shirt. He was totally different from the professor who stood on the podium during the day. 5 minutes later. "Are you okay? I told you to drink less." Ruey supported the slightly drunk Charles and leaned on the chair at the bar. Charles spread his hands indifferently and muttered, "I can drink more. I'll get you a wet towel to wipe your face." Ruey looked at him with heartache and turned to walk out of the door. Charles leaned on the chair at the bar and was in a daze. A beautiful figure approached him. "Are you Charles Xavier, the youngest professor of genetics at the University of Oxford?" Charles looked up in confusion and saw that it was a well-dressed sexy woman who came to him and asked. It was Mora, who came here from the United States to ask for help. Mora saw him looking over, so he went straight to the point. "Professor Charles, you have published a paper on genetic mutation before. I want to know if the kind of humans you are talking about now, who are walking at the forefront of evolution due to genetic mutation, have already appeared in this world?" Charles frowned. He was indeed a little drunk. Under the influence of alcohol, his head was a little dizzy, but the topic of gene variants still attracted him. He subconsciously put his finger on his temple and stared at Mora. In less than half a second, his mind entered the other's consciousness and read the reason why Mora had this question. In the consciousness generated by Mora's brain, the first thing that happened was Caesar's appearance and the things that happened in the Hell Club. It was as if he had experienced it himself. Charles shivered and completely sobered up from his drunkenness. Same kind, they were actually other mutants and there were so many of them. Professor? Professor? Looking at the dazed Charles, Mo stretched out his hand and waved it in front of his eyes. Then he said helplessly, "It seems that you are drunk. I will talk to you when you are sober." "There is no need for that, Agent Mora." Charles smiled faintly and looked at her. "Before you asked me this question, didn't you already know the answer? Don't worry, if the target is those mutants, I will do my best to help you." "That's great." Mora was both surprised and happy. She breathed a sigh of relief and said, "I want you to prove the existence of mutants in front of the CIA officers." "No problem." Charles agreed without hesitation. He never wanted to hide his mutant talent for a lifetime and pretend to be an ordinary person to get along with ordinary people. Another day later at the CIA headquarters. Although Charles had already made up his mind and he and Raven had taken the initiative to reveal their respective mutated talents, namely mind-reading and shape-shifting abilities, the CIA officers not only refused to accept this fact, but also reprimanded Agent Mora. This was also what Charles expected. Humans were often more afraid of the unknown. They would rather avoid it than understand it in depth. It required a long transition period to accept it. Except for one officer. The head of the CIA's military weapons research, Jenner, was a tall fat man in a bulging suit. After the meeting, he chased out of the room and expressed his willingness to let Charles and Ruewen join them to test Shang's strength and influence. In any case, this was a milestone in history. It was the first cooperation between mutants and government forces. After nightfall, near the coast of the United States in a slightly remote bar, Caesar randomly chose to come here. As an ordinary customer, he continued to taste good wine and collect interesting information. This kind of wandering in a different time and space was not bad. Sha sha sha. Acutely hearing the sound from the top of the bar, Caesar glanced above his head. When he saw Red Devil lying on the top of the building, quietly waiting under the moonlight, he could not help but shake his head. "You came here again? What a troublesome guy. Of all people, you just have to follow me. Let's see how long you can follow me." Creak. At this time, the wooden door of the bar opened. A tall young man wearing jeans, a leather jacket, a wide-brimmed hat, and a bag on his shoulder walked into the bar lobby. "A glass of whiskey." The tall young man sat down at the bar next to Caesar and spoke to the bartender in a low voice. Caesar looked at him from the side, but his eyes became brighter and brighter. The aura of the other party was too similar to the Lorna he knew. He was probably the only one who had a similar aura to Lorna's and gave off the feeling that the strength of his ability was definitely no less than Charles's level, Magneto Eric Lancel. He didn't expect to meet him, the #1 Marvel mutant with the ability to control magnetic fields. When Caesar looked at Eric, Eric also looked at him in return. His sharp eyebrows raised slightly. He felt an ominous aura from Caesar. "What are you looking at?" Eric said coldly as he took the whiskey from the bartender. Caesar smiled and said, "Brother, I'm sorry. There's a strong smell of blood on you, and at this moment, there's an unconcealable aura of revenge lingering around you." Eric's pupils contracted slightly, but his face remained calm. He raised his head, drank the whiskey in the glass in one gulp, and put the glass on the table with a bang. He said in a low voice, "So what? If I want to kill someone, do you want to stop me or do you want to call the police?" "I won't do that. It's too troublesome." Caesar shrugged. "Then you don't have a problem with me killing you now, do you?" Eric narrowed his eyes dangerously. He was like an injured and mad beast, maintaining a certain degree of hostility toward everyone, let alone the youth who had guessed his intentions. Only Caesar noticed that a few rusty screws on the wooden wall not far from Eric were quietly loosening, as if an inexplicable force was controlling them. Caesar said indifferently, "I have no objections. But the premise is that you can kill me." "That's what you said." A murderous intent appeared in Eric's eyes. The screws had separated from the wooden wall and were suspended in the air, ignoring gravity. The tips of the screws were all aimed at Caesar. Chapter 526. Inside the bar. Caesar and Eric were less than a meter away from each other. They looked at each other, and under Eric's magnetic manipulation, a few screws slowly floated up, ready to shoot out like bullets at any time. Caesar didn't seem to notice the potential danger. He maintained a calm smile on his face, oblivious to the fact that the Grim Reaper was holding him by the throat. Eric's killing intent swelled to the maximum. His fingers moved slightly, and he was about to manipulate the screws to teach Caesar a lesson. However, at this critical moment, a hand suddenly landed on his shoulder from behind. So fast. Eric was shocked. He didn't notice that a tall man was standing behind him. The tall man was wearing a suit with leather gloves on his hands and a mask that covered most of his face. His entire body was covered so tightly that not a trace of his skin was exposed. Under the dim light of the bar, a pair of beast-like eyes stared at him. Don't attack him. This is for your own good. Same kind. Red Devil Azatso lowered his body and whispered in Eric's ear. Who are you? Eric narrowed his eyes. His fingers moved slightly, and the screws changed direction, aiming at Azatso's head. Azazo replied proudly, I am the one who serves the Supreme Sovereign, Red Devil Azazo. Caesar's forehead was full of thick black lines. What the hell is this? Eric was also shocked. He didn't say a word and no one knew what he was thinking. Have you seen a finger blade? Azatso said to himself. Eric raised his eyebrows in surprise. Finger blade? Yes, a finger can be used as a blade. It's invincible and no one can move it. Azatso was about to explain, but Caesar suddenly left his seat and grabbed something behind him. Just like that, under the dumbfounded gaze of the other customers, he dragged Azatso, who was taller than him, out of the door. We'll meet again. Caesar didn't even turn his head. He waved his hand and dragged Azatso's tail out of the bar. Two weirdos. Eric snorted and put down his hand. The screw suspended in the air was once again controlled by gravity and fell to the ground. However, Caesar's guess was right. His hands reeked of blood, and his body was surrounded by the negative aura of revenge. Tonight he was indeed going to kill someone. It was still a massacre. Bill? Eric threw a small piece of gold that looked like a tooth on the table and hurriedly left the bar with his backpack. The bartender looked at the small piece of gold on the table and shrunk his neck in shock. He muttered with lingering fear, they really are, three weirdos. Late at night. Moonlight shone on the coast of the United States, and a large luxurious white speedboat was moored on the sea. The internal members of the Hellfire Club, Shang, Emma, and Janos, stood on the top deck of the speedboat and looked down at Colonel Henley, who was slowly walking up the ladder. Dear Colonel, welcome to join us. I believe there will be a lot of cooperation between us. Still, with a kind smile on his face, walked up to Colonel Henley alone. Colonel Henley's face was gloomy. He walked to the top deck of the speedboat and came in front of Shang. Suddenly, he took out a high-explosive grenade from his pocket and pulled the trigger of the grenade with his other hand. Give me money. $1 million, I will leave the United States completely. This is my only condition. Otherwise, I will detonate the grenade. Colonel, you have chosen the worst path. The smile on Shang's face disappeared. He was not afraid of the grenade. Instead, he took a step forward and encouraged him, Go ahead, I don't mind. Colonel Henley's hand was trembling slightly. Only then did he realize that he was threatening a group of lunatics who wanted to start a war, and a mutated human with unknown abilities. If you don't want to pull, then I will. Shang smiled and took the grenade from Colonel Henley's hand. Then he pulled the trigger of the high-explosive grenade in front of him. The grenade immediately turned into a shockwave and exploded. At the moment before that, Shang suddenly put his palms together and controlled the shockwave to a very small area, absorbing all the energy of the shockwave. Colonel Henley's mouth was wide open, and he did not know what to say as his only trump card was easily resolved by the other party. I will give it back to you. Shang stretched out two fingers and gently tapped on Colonel Henley's shoulder. A dazzling energy was transmitted. Colonel Henley's mouth moved, but before he could say anything, he turned into a pile of ashes and dissipated into the sea. White Empress Emma and Janos had been watching silently. They completely treated Colonel Henley as a clown. Shang, as the boss behind the Hellfire Club and the leader, was the strongest mutated human among them. Shang. The mutated ability was to absorb the energy that the body came into contact with and convert it for their own use. They could use it to enhance their strength, speed, and endurance, or reflect the absorbed energy back. This ability could be said to be the real nemesis of firearms. Beautiful. Emma stood up and clapped her hands. She suddenly raised her eyebrows and blurted out, Someone is coming. As if confirming her warning, Eric, who had changed into a diving suit, jumped over the railing from the shadow of the lower deck of the speedboat and came to the top deck of the speedboat. He stared at Shang coldly. Phew. Shang showed a surprised expression. Of course, he remembered the mutated humans that he had cultivated and studied, not to mention Eric, who was a talent with an extraordinary mutated ability. Yes, it's me. Eric smiled coldly. Be careful, he wants to kill you. Emma's expression changed drastically. She quickly transformed into a diamond body and stood in front of Shang. Just as he did that, a few bayonets were fired at Shang and hit Emma's body with clanking noises. Eric raised his left hand and wanted to continue controlling the bayonets. But Emma was faster than him and used a powerful telekinetic wave to attack his brain. Ah! Eric held his head with both hands and growled in extreme pain. Go! Gynos used his fingers to create a fast-spinning torrent of wind that blasted the defenseless Eric off the speedboat and into the sea. Shang looked at the sea that had returned to silence and ordered, "Let's leave this place quickly." Yes. Emma nodded. At this moment, a bright light shone on the luxurious speedboat from several hundred meters away like a pillar. Looking at the illuminated surface of the sea, several U.S. warships could be seen approaching from the coast in an encirclement. There's a mutated human on the other side. He's using telekinesis to locate us. Emma, who was returning to her human body, turned into a shiny diamond body again and said quickly, "Run." Even Shang could not maintain his composure and took the lead to rush to the bottom deck of the luxury speedboat. On the deck of a certain American warship. There's someone with similar abilities on the other side. He blocked my telekinesis. Charles pressed his fingers against his temples and said anxiously to Captain Jenner beside him, "I can't help you. You can only rely on yourselves for the rest." On the sea beside the luxury speedboat. Don't even think about escaping. As a head popped out of the sea, Eric's face was ferocious. He raised his left hand high and magnetic force came out of his body. The chains of the speedboat's anchor floated from the bottom of the sea and slammed violently into the speedboat. Chapter 527. On the road beside the shoreline. Most of the night was filled with couples walking back and forth hand in hand. Caesar was the only one who dragged Azazo by his tail as he paced back and forth. What's that? A tail? It's probably an ornament. It's disgusting. Stay away from these two weirdos. Many passers-by were pointing at Caesar and Azo. However, when Azo kicked them, they scattered in shock. "You've finally acknowledged me, master," Azo said happily. "Acknowledge your head." Caesar walked to the shore and lifted Azo up with a little force. Then he threw him 5 meters into the sea. "Wah!" Azo exclaimed. The moment he touched the water, he turned into a ball of flame and disappeared. The next moment he returned to Caesar's side. "You're really annoying." Caesar could not bear to look at the ability of instant teleportation. "Thanks for the exaggeration." Azo revealed a row of clean teeth. Just as he was about to say something, he heard a strange sound coming from the sea. He could not help but look in the direction of the sound. About a few hundred meters away from the shoreline, 3 American warships were heading towards a luxury speedboat. The luxury speedboat also suffered a mysterious attack. A thick iron chain used for anchoring rose up like a snake and slammed into the front of the luxury speedboat, penetrating it. The chain then continued to move forward and cut the speedboat apart, causing explosions and flames to spread everywhere. "That's Mr. Shang's boat?" Azo widened his eyes in shock. He subconsciously wanted to teleport over to save them. However, before he could use instant teleportation, a hand landed lightly on his shoulder. "Don't go over. Otherwise I'll kill you." Caesar's words were very calm. However, in Azo's heart, it was like a bolt of lightning. Caesar's killing intent was very faint. However, if he really teleported over, he would definitely die. That was without a doubt. Caesar's killing intent was definitely much less than Kale's, but that did not mean that he would not kill. To him, killing was as easy as opening the cap of a soda before drinking it. Would you want to kill the cap of a bottle? It couldn't be, right? Just to drink the soda inside, he could open it without hesitation. Got it. Azo nodded obediently. "Take a good look. There are so many mutants gathered here tonight," Caesar said. "Not only Magneto but also White Empress and the others, even a certain professor who had yet to lose his hair had come." Boom. Boom. Eric floated on the surface of the sea. His face was tense. His right hand grabbed the air in front of him, manipulating the iron chain that weighed several tons to whip the luxury speedboat. Soon the speedboat was completely sunk into the sea. "It's him. I didn't expect him to be so powerful." Azatso had a certain level of night vision. When he saw Eric sinking the speedboat on the sea, he recognized that it was the mutant he saw in the bar. He couldn't help but exclaim, "That's magnetic field control. If it can't even deal with a speedboat, then this ability is too cheap." Caesar argued. Right now, Magneto's control over his abilities wasn't even as good as Lorna's. When he fully developed this ability, he would be the villain who would cause everyone's expressions to change. It was the same for the professor. They were still too young, but it was precisely because of their youth that this was the era that truly belonged to them. Eric looked at the speedboat wreckage that sank into the sea, but he still stared at the surface of the sea. There was an undercurrent surging at the bottom of the sea beside him. Through his magnetic field control, he could clearly sense that a small submarine was quickly escaping towards the deep sea area. "Don't even think about escaping. Stay here." Eric's face was ferocious. He no longer held back. Even if he was sinking to the bottom of the sea, he had to free up his hands to use his ability. The small submarine carrying Shang and the others was pulled by the magnetic force. Its speed slowed down, but it still continued to drive deeper into the sea. The force indirectly pulled Eric from the surface of the water and kept pulling him down to the bottom of the sea. Just then, a warship came to the sea nearby. On the deck, Charles looked agitated and shouted, "There's someone in the water. Another mutant. He's about to drown. We have to save him." But the American soldiers couldn't confirm the location and were still searching left and right. In a hurry, Charles jumped into the water from the deck. Using his mind to lock the position, he dived to the bottom of the sea and soon grabbed Eric's shoulder. Eric was still trying to pull the submarine with his magnetic field. His face was already red and he looked like he was going to die together with Charles. "Let go. If you go on like this, you'll die." Charles reached out and grabbed Eric, using his mind to enter his brain and directly conveyed his meaning through his heart. Eric was almost exhausted. Looking at the submarine getting farther and farther away, he finally deactivated his magnetic field ability and followed Charles to the surface. "Your consciousness drilled into my brain." Eric gasped for air. "Sorry, I couldn't help it." Charles's hands were still on his shoulders. Eric spat out seawater and said vaguely, "I thought there were very few people like us, Eric." Charles smiled and said firmly, "From today onwards, you are no longer alone. It's really a fated meeting." On the coast, Caesar watched all this silently. Magneto and Professor X were the origins of the two mutant forces. In the future, the epic war of love and hate in the X-Men universe would also begin from this moment. However, that had nothing to do with him. He was just a wanderer. He just needed to find a way to leave this space and time as soon as possible and return to the Marvel universe where his body existed. "Let's go." Caesar turned and left. Go." Azo was stunned for a moment, but he quickly reacted and excitedly followed Caesar. "Yes, let's go. Go. Master, slow down, wait for me. Just call me young master in the future. As for you, how about Little Red?" "Oh, young master, can you change the name?" "Then Big Red." The figures of the two stretched on the coast and soon disappeared together at the corner of the street. In an extended version of a black Buick, Officer Jenner sat in the main driver's seat and drove Charles, Ruewen, Mora, and Eric, who was rescued in the sea, to a secret military base under the protection of military forces. "You will like this place. This is where the CIA studies military combat weapons and defense. I am the overall person in charge and the highest officer here." Jenner proudly parked the car in the open space, got out of the car and led Charles and the others inside. "Why do I have to go with you?" Eric's face was cold, and he was carrying his own backpack on his shoulder. Charles immediately advised, "Eric, we have a common enemy. Those people from the Hellfire Club are very strong, and it is very dangerous to fight them alone. What's more, even if you have the confidence to defeat them, you can't find where they are now." "Okay, I will stay for the time being." Eric nodded. He had to admit that Charles, as a professor, had a way of teaching and guiding others. "Then let's stay here for the time being and find a way to deal with those people." Ruewen took the lead and followed Jenner into the building. The discussion went on for an unknown amount of time. When the meeting ended, everyone returned to their assigned rooms to sleep. Charles yawned and walked in the corridor. He saw Mora leaning against the guardrail alone, looking up at the moon in a daze. "What are you thinking about?" Charles walked towards her. "Can't you read minds?" Mora saw that it was Charles and could not help but roll her eyes at him. Charles said seriously, "I usually don't peek into other people's thoughts." "As if I believe you." Mora looked at the moon again and said, "Professor Charles, I heard that you once lived with Caesar. What kind of person is he? Hearing the name Caesar, the expression in Charles's eyes became complicated. Chapter 528. A moon peeked out from the dark clouds, and the bright moonlight shone on the open space of the base. Charles bent down slightly with his hand on the corridor railing, and looked sideways at Mora. Why do you suddenly want to know about Caesar? Mora turned his face away, not wanting to answer, but he was afraid that Charles would read his mind directly, so he could only dodge. According to you, isn't he also a mutated human, and a noble duke of the United Kingdom? If he can join us, maybe we can increase our chances of winning against those people from the Hellfire Club. Charles's mouth twitched. Is his mutated ability not suitable for fighting? Mora looked at him in surprise. No. Charles shook his head. Rather than saying that his ability is not suitable for fighting, it's more accurate to say that I don't know what his mutated ability is. How is that possible? Mora was really surprised this time. This is the truth. Although we have lived under the same roof for several years, the only person I can't see through is probably Caesar. Charles said this and helplessly spread his hands. My ability, since young, has never been able to enter Caesar's consciousness. Even when he was sleeping, when he was most defenseless. If the consciousness of an ordinary person is like an ordinary house, you can enter as long as you find the door. Then his consciousness is like a super safe with layers of encryption. What kind of person is he? Mora opened his mouth slightly and asked this question for the second time. How should I put it? Charles scratched his head and pointed to the sky outside. He comes from the sky. The sky. Yes. I was less than 10 years old at that time, on the night I met Reborn. Caesar fell from the sky like a meteorite and smashed a hole in my yard. Even so, he was still unscathed. He, who was homeless, naturally stayed in my house temporarily. You're also a complete weirdo. Hearing Charles's answer, Mora didn't know what to say. Was it something an ordinary person would continue to let an unknown person stay in his house? Mora caught the key point and said, wait. So, Caesar was only 3 or 4 years old at that time. Yes. He was much younger than us. Originally, Reborn and I treated him as our younger brother. But after we became familiar with each other, Charles had a complicated look in his eyes as he said, at that time, Caesar was already more mature than expected, and, due to my mutated ability, my brain's development was far beyond that of ordinary people. I had a photographic memory when I was learning, and I could learn anything as soon as I started. I was undoubtedly a super genius. But when I get home, I still have to ask Caesar for help if I don't understand anything. I'm a special existence that is both my teacher and my friend. Emola said thoughtfully, Caesar is also a genius? Genius? Charles couldn't help but laugh. I've never seen him study. It's as if he was born to know everything. He's the kind of celestial being born to know everything. In front of him, all those who call themselves geniuses will feel inferior. Mora was more and more shocked by Charles's high evaluation. As a CIA agent, Charles was already among the top geniuses. She didn't expect that Caesar's level of genius was even higher. All right. Go to bed early. We still have to find the whereabouts of the people from the Hellfire Club tomorrow. Charles yawned and walked to his room. He waved at Mora as he said goodbye. Mora was still standing in the same place. No one knew what she was thinking. Right. Charles stopped and said solemnly without looking back. Instead of thinking about getting Caesar involved, it's better to look for other mutated humans. If Caesar wanted to make a move, I'm afraid the world situation would have developed in the direction he imagined. After leaving this inexplicable sentence, Charles continued to walk. His figure disappeared around the corner of the corridor, leaving Mora standing quietly in the corridor in a daze. They didn't notice that at the corner of the corridor on the other side, Eric leaned his back against the wall and silently listened to the conversation between the two. Caesar. Eric muttered to himself as he quietly clenched his fist. America, New York, a late-night bar in a city. Looking up at the lively place in front of him, Azo turned to look at Caesar and asked in surprise, Young master, why did we come to such a place? To scout for information, Caesar said matter-of-factly. Azo was taken aback again and said, You want to scout for information? Young master, I can help you sneak into the intelligence databases of various countries to check. Big Red, what do you know? Caesar said in annoyance, That's so boring, unlike here where there is good wine to drink and beautiful women to chat with. And the information I want is not available in the intelligence databases of the major countries. If you want to know why, I've read all of them a few years ago. Azo nodded. Thanks for the lesson. Then let's go. Caesar walked in front and led Azo, who had put on a hat, into the bar. Caesar was already a regular in most bars and nightclubs in the world. As soon as they entered, a bunny girl led them to an empty seat. Just as they passed by the entertainment hall where people were dancing to their heart's content, Caesar suddenly saw a familiar figure, which made him stop abruptly. What's wrong, young master? Noticing his abnormality, Azo also looked over. It could be seen that it was a man in his 30s. His black hair was like the ears of a wolf, and there was a beard on his face that seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. He was wearing a worn-out leather wallet and was sitting alone in a chair, drinking wine. Same kind. Azo narrowed his eyes. With his beast-like sensitivity, he could tell at a glance that the man was a mutated human, and a very dangerous mutated human. What kind? The bunny girl beside him asked curiously. There's nothing for you to do. You can leave first and bring 3 glasses of brandy. Caesar took out a few $100 bills and sent the bunny girl away. The bunny girl didn't mind. She took the $100 bills, swayed her round hips, nodded with a smile and left. Let's go. Caesar waved his hand and led Azo to the man. Young master, this seat is fine. Are you interested in a drink, uncle? Azo and Caesar, one on the left and one on the right, came to the seat on both sides of the man and surrounded him in the middle. Get the F***ck out of here. The man was drinking, and after putting down the glass, he directly cursed. His violent temper was obvious. Azo's face changed slightly as he didn't expect the other party to be so rude. Friend, don't be so angry. Caesar didn't mind. With a smile on his face, he looked at the familiar man in front of him and felt very emotional. He didn't expect to meet him in another time and space. Wolverine Logan. The lone wolf who is really in the X-Men universe. His family was brutally killed, he turned against his brother, and Wolverine is still wandering. Get out of here, you little bastard, when did I become your friend? Logan took out a cigar and lit it, cursing. This sense of familiarity made Caesar smile uncontrollably. It's hard to say. Maybe in another time and space we are not only friends but also family. Chapter 529. 3 days later. Since the battle on the coastal waters a few days ago, the people of the Hellfire Club had hidden in a corner of the world and disappeared. Charles and the others couldn't find a way to deal with it and could only wait patiently at the CIB research base. However, during this period, Eric finally agreed to stay and join the mutated team to fight Shang and the others. The premise was that the initiative of the battle was handed over to the mutated humans and not the UA military. The mutated humans must be dealt with by the mutated humans. This was a temporary consensus. At the same time, in the research base, Hank, who was also a mutated human researcher, finally created a special device for Charles's ability that could control the situation of the mutated humans. Brain expansion machine. It could greatly increase the range and strength of Charles's telepathy ability. Through the expansion of consciousness, he could directly find the mutated humans hidden among ordinary people. Although it was called a machine, it was actually a circular machine fortress that could accommodate up to 10 people. The inner and outer walls of the circular fortress were antennas and electrode plates, and in the middle was a platform equipped with a special helmet. This device must rely on powerful telepathy to use, otherwise, it was equivalent to an unmanned empty shell that couldn't play a corresponding role. At this time, Charles and the others gathered in the brain expansion machine. In theory, after your telepathy is sent to the outside world through the transmitter, the mutated humans will feed back a unique signal, and the geographical coordinates will be marked on the built-in screen. Hank was a tall and thin young man with a delicate face. He was a refined young man wearing glasses. He explained the precautions while helping Charles put on the helmet connected to dense wires under everyone's gaze. Eric quietly looked at everything inside the machine with a thoughtful look on his face. After seeing Charles put on the helmet, he didn't forget to mock him. You really look like a cute lab rat. Don't mock me. Charles snorted. I used to be a lab rat, so I know very well, Eric said lightly. Ruewen looked at Charles with slight worry, fearing that an accident would happen. Charles, are you ready? Hank looked at Charles, who put on the helmet, and pondered. I suggest you shave your hair, it will be safer. Let's start, don't even think about touching my hair. Charles glared at him. If he lost his hair at such a young age, how could he be the prince of the nightclub in the future? Then I'm ready. 3, 2, 1. Hank returned to the control device in front of the screen. After reading the numbers, he pressed the button that acted as a switch. The connected wires lit up one after another, and the helmet at the end suddenly lit up. Charles shouted. Under the enhancement of the brain expansion machine, his consciousness, which was originally restricted to his physical body, seemed to have been sublimated through the transmitter and extended infinitely to the outside world. It was like a god's perspective. Charles suddenly saw the human groups near or far away clearly. Among the billions of people of all shapes and sizes, ordinary people were unlit gray, while mutants were colored with paint, as if stars were dotting the earth. We're actually not alone. Charles couldn't help but laugh, and he had the urge to cry. He had always thought that mutants were rare, and they were the outliers among humans. But now it seems that the number of mutants is definitely much more than he imagined. It's just that after they found out that they were different, most of them chose to hide and disguise themselves as ordinary people and continue to live. While Charles was looking at the mutated humans that were constantly reflected in his consciousness, the screen of the brain expansion machine was also copying and printing, recording and printing the coordinates of the mutated humans one by one. Charles suddenly frowned, and his telepathy extended to an unknown place. He suddenly saw that among the ordinary people and the mutated humans, there was the most dazzling person. If the mutated humans were the dazzling stars, then the mysterious person who appeared was the radiant sun. Who is it? Just a little peek and he felt a tingling in his brain. Charles gritted his teeth and held on. Relying on the power of the brain expansion machine, he tried to explore forward with his telepathy, trying to see the sun-like figure. Zzz. The current was injected into the helmet along the wires, making the machine run so hard that white-hot smoke rose. Hank looked at the various values and warnings on the screen, looked at Charles in surprise and shouted, "Charles, what are you doing? The machine has entered a state of high-load operation." "Turn it off." Ruewen panicked. Eric raised his left hand and was ready to unplug all the wires. "Don't turn it off. Let me see it again." Charles stopped them and endured the discomfort of his brain exploding. His telepathy was still moving forward with difficulty. Finally, he gradually saw the back of a muscular man wrapped in the dazzling light. This sense of familiarity, that is, Charles widened his eyes in shock. As if sensing his existence, that person slowly turned around. His eyes seemed to shoot out two beams of light, instantly piercing through all illusions and reality, crossing the distance and directly seeing where he was. Walking on the lawn of the base, Mora was walking toward the brain expansion machine, hoping to see the progress of Charles and the rest of them. But after a deafening explosion, the circular machine fortress before him was like a burnt egg, with thick smoke rising up non-stop. Something happened. Mora's face changed and he quickened his pace. When he came to the gate of the fortress, he saw Eric and Ruewen supporting Charles, coughing violently as they escaped from the machine. Hank walked at the back. His glasses were crooked and his hair was a little burnt. Holding a pile of printed papers, he took a long breath and said, "Fortunately, the intelligence files are fine." "Charles, what did you do?" Eric asked in surprise. Charles did not answer but repeated, it's him, and only him. No wonder this is the gap that has always existed. It's really, really amazing." He smiled bitterly, then his knees went soft and he directly fell on the grass in dizziness. United States, New York, underground fighting arena. The fighting arena had been booked, and there were only 3 people inside. Azo and Logan, who had put on their boxing gloves, were exchanging blows with each other. Both of them had 5 senses as sharp as wild beasts and were extremely proficient in close combat. Without using their mutated abilities, it was hard to tell who had the upper hand in a short period of time. Caesar stood below the stage and was still looking behind him. "Kid, do you want to come up and try?" Logan pushed Azo back with a punch and arrogantly hooked his fist at Caesar. "I'll pass." Caesar looked back, shrugged and continued to watch the show. "I drew unlimited cards at Marvel." You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.